And then I've also got to make sure that the interface is turned up. I always have the interface at, like, halfway, because whenever I record, I just do so much yelling and so much clipping. Okay, perf. Yeah, I think everything's in order. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
Nice. I've been waiting for this moment. Nice.
Hello everyone, I'm glad you could join us. For those who don't know who I am, my name is Joey, and I am a content creator in the vocal synthesizer community. While I typically make more scripted videos, today is a bit different. I've been a guest on interviews and podcasts before, but never have I been in the driver's seat, so this is definitely uncharted territory. Today we have a very special guest with us, who I was dying to have a chat with. She's no stranger to the microphone, with over 10 years as a recording artist in broadcast radio, screen acting, advertisement, and recently made waves within the Vocalsynth community as she was revealed to be the voice provider of the Natalie AI database for Dreamtonics' SynthesizerV. That's your cue, Natalie. Tell us about yourself.
Wow.
I said there was a name drop.
Yes. Well, first of all, I have to say what a delight it is to be able to be here with you, and how wonderful it's been to get to know you over the last few weeks ahead of this. You've been so delightful as to kind of chat in advance with me and kind of help me get into the community and to fully understand the context of everything, which has been such a help, and I can't thank you enough for that. You're such a good soul, and I can tell you're such a kindred spirit. I'm so pleased to have this chat with you, because I know, we are so similar in so many ways, and I think it's going to be so easy for us to rock and roll through various topics.
100%. So yes, as I said, none other than Natalie Nicole Gilbert. So how about just a little breadcrumb backgrounds, let's say, of like how would you describe yourself?
Gosh. Well, I feel like, so often in like artist bios, it's like, well, they began at the tender age of XYZ. And like, I can't deny, like, I did start singing and performing at a very young age. I did, because I was very blessed to have a mother who was a musician full-time herself. She was a pianist. And, one of the big monumental accomplishments we often talk about with her is that she played with Liberace, but long beyond that, she also, she was she classically trained. She had a master's in music. She played for weddings and funerals and Muhammad Ali's birthday party and just like all these things. But she raised me exposed to so much music. So it was very easy for me as a child to start songwriting by the age of 3 or 4, to just kind of occupy my mind in the backseat of the car during long trips. And we took so many long trips. Oh my gosh. I could probably fill a whole album just with like childhood songs about trees that I wrote when I was young. And I actually have like sheet music that because I wasn't old enough to write yet, I would sing a song I wrote to her and she would notate it for me. And it would be the most, it's heartbreakingly beautiful. There's one called like What Happens When Boyfriends and Girlfriends Fall in Love, because I couldn't even like get my mind around. I knew I wanted to write a love song. That's what I listened to. So she wrote all the little notes by hand with all the little lyrics. And it makes 0 sense. It's like what an AI, would generate now as a love song about boyfriends and girlfriends. But it's what came out of my little 3 or 4-year-old mind. So I was really lucky to have somebody in my life who cheered me on and really created the space for me to do that at such a young age. And then she also put me in dance classes and theater classes. So by the time I was 10, I had already been Maria in West Side Story and like starred in a few musicals and done some Shakespeare, so it was kind of wild. Like, I'm not going to lie. I've touched a little bit of everything. And I think in some ways the industry gets uncomfortable with me because everybody wants you to be one thing, right? Although I think, yes, but finally industry seems to understand that actually it is beneficial for us to have done more than one thing, be exposed to more than one thing, and create more than one thing. So that's kind of what excites me. So I came up through theater, through dance and ballet and jazz, through music composition at a very early age. and kind of just embraced every part of the creative industries that I could, even, photography, and I do a little sketching, not that much, not nearly as much as this community does. They are brilliant at that. Like, they would put me to shame, but I think it's so important to fulfill that itch every time you have that idea to be creative and to not judge yourself for it. Like, I think that's one of the lessons that I've had to learn continually, is to not be like, oh, is this good enough? Especially with the company I keep. My goodness, like it would be very easy to be intimidated if I wanted to be, but at some point you just have to be like, you know what? I've got this. I'm doing this for me. And if somebody else likes it, that's awesome.
I definitely feel that. I mean, like, in the case of yourself, I hope you don't mind me saying that, like, you fit the bill of being quite inspirational to an indie network of budding songwriters, lyricists, audio technicians, because in a modern society where we're often told to, like, pursue one hustle, for lack of a better term, religiously and never lose that focus, I feel like the ability to sustainably contribute to so many different mediums is definitely something to behold. And it's like, it's kind of been piecing together that, like, that's been a part of yourself since you were at a young age. Like, I mean, again, you had a family of musicians. In fact, you actually have SoundCloud archives of songs written and performed by members of your family. One I particularly want to point out to our listeners is the cassette recording on your mother, Ruth Gilbert's SoundCloud, featuring the vocals of none other than 14-year-old Natalie.
There are times when I look behind me, and when I look, it's you I don't see.
This is true, yes. Which I totally forgot about until you and I were conversing the other day, and I was like, oh my gosh, I forget this is even online. Yeah.
I love listening to it because it's like, not only did you just, like, display that talent at such a young age, but it's like, your voice then and your voice now are just, like, so distinct that it really shows how far you've come, and I kind of want to, like, implore creatives to always keep an archive of your development like that.
It's really true, and it's hard to listen to your old work, right? Because you hear all those things that you've improved upon, and you're like, oh, it's almost embarrassing. Like, not quite, because on the one hand, you're like, wow, look at what I did so early on, or what I did so long ago. But on the other hand, you're like, oh, I don't use that much vibrato now. Now I would know how to play the mic better. I wouldn't, use so much of my head voice. I would stay in my lower register a little better, but I'm like you. When I listen to it, I hear the same thing. I'm like, you can still hear that, like, early, like, diamond in the rough something there, though. Above and beyond the singing aspect, which you're totally right. You can, like, hear me even at that early young age. The songwriting and the composing part was already there too. Like, I can already hear the long, lavish bridges that I like, and the minor chords. Oh, the minor chords in that song. That's the one thing that I think makes me leave it online where it could be found or shared, even though it's kind of buried on that page of my mom's. Because at the end of the day, for being 14, that's a pretty okay song.
Damn right, damn right.
And I will totally get as as credited on the SoundCloud page. My mother played the piano on that one. My piano skills were not yet at that level, but she could hear just from my melody where I was taking it, and I encouraged her to lean into some things and arrange it a certain way. So she gets all the credit for the actual beautiful piano playing, but for the composition, the arrangement, the vocals, I feel proud about it. Yes, absolutely, from a cassette, and you gotta love that, right?
And as a fun aside, I wanted to top off with is that on your Twitter, it's not uncommon that you share your work with us from over the years. And what stood out to me that I feel like I need some context for, because I feel like there's a fun story behind it, is that you posted an American Idol parody from 2007 called "The Next Jason Joseph," and it was a fever dream. It was a fever dream, Natalie. There's you singing interspersed with, like, footage of Simon Cowell, and then you're just elated at the footage of Randy Jackson gassing you up. Like, that excitement, it had, like, this layer of authenticity that I was just like, there's a story in here.
Gotta find some peace inside this restless heart.
Yes. So, oh my gosh. I was, at that time, part of a creative group. This is actually that same group of people where I was part of that songwriting workshop where I met one of my collaborators, Dana Bizignano. And I don't remember how I how this casting call got put on my radar. I don't think that I'd met Jason Joseph yet at that point. But we all of us who were in this sort of music collaborative in that space were connected somehow. And somehow I heard that they were looking for actors who could improvise, but who also had some kind of singing chops. And honestly, I think most of the people who responded weren't even necessarily big singers. They were just improv actors, like comedy actors, a lot of them, because I was also in the acting team there. So they told all of us before this video, and this was just, YouTube was still kind of new at the time. And,
I mean, 2007, that would have been I want to say 2 years after YouTube started. I think it was 2005 that it opened up. Sometimes I have to remember that 2005 wasn't 5 years ago.
Thank you. The only one. Yes, yeah. So, I mean, people were still kind of figuring out, I have the ability to post something and people can watch it. What should I post? And people were just making any kind of funny thing that might go viral, right? And obviously, American Idol has been huge for a very long time. So I guess Jason had this idea to sort of introduce people to his music, that he would have other people pretend to sing it as part of an American Idol audition. And when I came in that day to record, and I think I went out and bought a little pantsuit for it and everything too, just something that was dancey and soulful. They told us, they were be prepared to do one take where you are losing and you get the bad news that you didn't make it, and then do another take where you win. I didn't prepare anything big. I learned the song, I came in and sang it a cappella, and I did both takes, and I didn't know which one they were going to use. I mean, for all I knew, there was another great vocalist in there that was going to be the winner. But then when I saw that final cut, I think I saw it when it was released to YouTube. I had no idea until then. Then I saw that I was selected as the winner. And then they had, like you say, all that interspersed footage from the actual show, congratulating me.
You literally had the Drag Race winner's cut experience of you don't know who wins until it actually broadcasts.
Truly, yeah, I had no idea. It was kind of flattering. Even though it's a fake competition, it was still very sweet that
You effectively did win.
I effectively did win. And Jason, as far as I know, I mean, maybe he'd seen me perform a few times. I don't know. I don't think that Jason knew me very well, so it wasn't oh, she's a friend, I'll make sure she wins. He didn't know me very well at all. I got to know he and his roommate a little bit later. And we hung out a bit, and I went to some of his shows later. But the funny thing is, too, I don't think I even told you this yet. Today, I know. Today, my hairstylist, who cuts my hair, is a hairstylist for American Idol. He is one of the main. He styles Lionel Richie's hair all the time. So I part of the reason why I found that video at one point recently was to share it with him so he could get a laugh out of it, because that's his daily environment now. And I thought he would appreciate that. But yeah, it was a kind of funny experience. And I mean, I love improving, but that was it's such a rare piece of footage, right? Like you say, I mean, first of all, the fact that it's so old, it's wild. Like you say, it's wild that 2007 was almost 20 years ago now.
I think it's between that and the tape, what my intent has basically become with this interview and subsequently this video is just being the big Vocalsynth outing experience of just, hey guys, here's the Natalie Nicole archive of all the really rare Natalie Nicole Gilbert resources.
The archive you didn't know you needed. Apparently.
The archive you did not know you needed. Have fun, everyone.
Indeed. Well, and I mean, the one thing I really love about sharing any and all of this is exactly what you touched on, is that, I didn't walk into a Hollywood studio perfectly polished, articulating everything, knowing how to play the mic and all of that, off the cuff. It took years for me to develop those skills, and you do hear glimmers of it along the way. But it really had to be cultivated through a lot of those kind of bizarre experiences that I could not understand. Yeah.
And not only that, but it's also it's as you were mentioning that it was part of the acting group that you were a part of, it's also very much just the company you keep and what the kind of results from all of you interacting with each other. I feel some of the greatest opportunities that I've had in any creative space online has just come from making friends and then being given those opportunities by friends.
Oh, absolutely. And opportunities you would never even know to ask for, you know? I think you and I spoke privately, I think, briefly about how I ran across Maluka, who one of the people in the Vocalsynth community amazingly took my voice bank to cover in that playlist that Vsynths made for me. And it was wild to me because she and I met online years ago. And it was one of those things where I wanted to collaborate with her, but I was a little shy. She didn't know me from Adam or Eve, so like, why would she say yes? But she had just won an international songwriting competition that I was about to submit for. So I took the chance to just message her on her social media and say, hey, I'm submitting too. Was your experience with them good? Did you enjoy the songwriting retreat that you won as part of the thing? And I might have even gotten as far as typing, like, would you like to collaborate? And then backspace. No. Too early for that. But then when she replied to me, she was like, oh, I loved the retreat in Ireland. It's such a great songwriting thing. And I've listened to your music, and my goodness, we should collaborate sometime. And so she initiated that. And I was just like, that's awesome. But it was kind of that much more beautiful because it came from her instead of starting with me.
That is the, like, big blindside moment of, you have, like, the little internal thought of just like, if I worked with them, it would be great. And then they just immediately just like, oh my god, we should do something, bestie. And it's just like, wait, I was supposed to do that.
Well, and it's like, because you connect not just on that artistic level, but you also recognize that you're similar people and you have similar mindsets. And I think that just makes it that much easier to connect and collaborate and share those creative pieces.
I feel like especially in a creative circle in which there's almost like a social hierarchy of sorts and we get starstruck by seeing people who we kind of see as more influential than us, I feel like it is very easy to just forget that a really important aspect of it is whether or not I would vibe with this person. Like, I can think of, like, so many people, both in the space that I'm in and people, like, in other spaces that I happen to have some overlap in, where I'm basically just like, I'm sure they're an absolutely wonderful person and it would be very fun if I did something with them, but I'm not sure about if we would be the greatest co-workers, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, well, and I don't know if you know that with the advent of all the, online meeting apps, they actually have a songwriting, it's almost like a dating app. It's not meant to be used.
I keep seeing those. I've been on the I'm on the Instagram Reels era of my ADHD, and so it's just every 5 reels I just scroll to one that's just like, it's Tinder but for musicians, and I'm just like, I don't know if I want that.
I hear that. Well, I will say I haven't actually met up in person with anybody there yet, but I have scrolled through the options on We Should Write Sometime. And I mean, it's cool, because you do have the listen links, you do have the ability to go through, and you can match mostly based on, do our genres vibe? Does our experience seem to be somewhat similar? And I even got on the, just as of last night, I also got on the app for fellow neurodivergents. I'm not sure if you see it as Hickey or Hikey, something like that.
I'm not sure I don't know the name, but I think I have seen one of the ads a handful of times, yes.
Yeah, and that one seems cool too, because it's like, my love languages are info dump and hyperfocus, and I'm like, you are my people. And I'm like, that's kind of cool,
The biggest relief of my life of finding out that we're both incredibly neurospicy, and then I was just like, wait, so you mean to tell me that I've just asked someone if they want to do an interview, and it happens to be someone who's totally down for an info dump about the fandom that I'm in?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Oh. Info dumping is definitely a love language. And finding other people that can info dump about similar topics is a joy. So
my love languages are info dumping and sending 5-second long memes to people and just putting us in all lowercase.
Brilliant. I have not received one of those yet, I don't think, but I'll keep an eye out for that one.
Oh god, if I get you on that, you won't hear the end of it. And I think kind of starting things off with your career before we even get into any of the Vsynth trivia stuff, is because it's in this community we make strides in Vsynths by we are very much like an insular community in a way in which we make works for Vsynth people, and especially in like the Japanese section of the community, we have this intersectionality. Like we have the otaku culture, we have anime fans, we have gamers. So it's very often that we get this overlap elsewhere, like in your case where you got to voice the database for one of the most popular voice synth engines available right now, and to my knowledge, it's your first contribution to this scene on such a specific level. And this community finding out about you was rather unpredictable, so I kind of wanted you to walk us through your familiarity with Vocalsynths at the time of the development of the Natalie project, and how much any of this was expected to you. Even if the answer is zero.
I mean, pretty close to zero, for sure. Where we are now and what I've learned about the community since roughly May 8th of this year, not yet a month ago, is light years more than I knew at the time that I voiced the voice bank. I was reached out to by a dear friend of mine who is a composer. We worked together on a few songs and projects. I was an elf voice for a video game he composed for, and we just had a song. He just used one of my songs in a Lifetime movie that broadcast recently that he did the composing and music supervision for. And he reached out to me and he said, Mike Shapiro is his name, by the way. He reached out to me and he was like, hey, so this company that I've been consulting has been looking for a vocalist to record for an engine that would be able to create a voice for songwriting. And as soon as he kind of reached out to me, initially I was like, oh no, this sounds like they're going to need me to go like AEIOU, like super boring, or that they would need to give me this super detailed monstrosity of like Rachmaninoff level sheet music where I would have to just, go through, and I was like, tell me more, but I might not be the right choice for this. If it's too technical, it might be really time consuming and tedious. But pretty quickly when I got put in touch with Dreamtonics and they had a chance to do a Zoom with me and kind of walk me through what they needed, they shared that actually I could sing full out and that I, more or less, against some criteria they had for me, I could choose what songs I did to give them. And once they said that, I'm like, okay, I'm in, and it was beautiful too, because once they told me what they needed, and I was like, oh, so you don't care if it's an original song or a cover or, what key it's in or any of that. So if that's the case, I've got 3 albums worth of songs that I can pull the vocals off of for you and hand over to you that have jazz and rock and dance and power ballads and Christmas songs, and they were like, hand them over. So it was kind of a unique experience because wonderfully, beautifully, they were able to use a lot of stuff that I had already created. And then once we kind of knew their criteria and we were in the studio working on other things and wrapping up other projects, we were able to record a handful more of songs for them that we had them in mind for then, that we knew when at the time that we recorded it, which we didn't know for those 3 albums worth of songs, that this set of songs would be first and foremost used for them, but then I would also have my own rights to release them publicly later, which I'm very proud to tell you we are going to be doing soon. It's been a bit of a delay because of COVID and everything. I do have a new album coming out with those remaining handful of songs that I gave to Dreamtonics, where we're going to be finishing those up and releasing them in little singles throughout this year, and then as an album probably early next year as the timing works out.
Brilliant. So, because I'm sure some community members could correct me if I'm wrong. Your insight in the production process of SynthV AI has been particularly eye-opening, because I just feel like you've been able to confirm a lot of aspects of the production process that we as audience members either didn't know or just didn't receive confirmation of. One bit which being, it's nice to know that it's like you still retain the rights to the training data that's used. So it's like Dreamtonics effectively got the rights to recreate your voice, but not necessarily that they seized any of the rights of what was used in order to create that to begin with. Also, just as well, just knowing that, like, you could have used you were allowed to use a home setup, and also that it could have been vocal stems from your previous works, and that must have really expedited things. You also mentioned that there is also some amount of Latin data that you sent their way, as well as English. And I also want to bring up the sheer quantity of the data that you sent over. I believe in community discussions, the commonly accepted minimum amount of data for a SynthV AI bank is at least 2 continuous hours of singing if you put all your takes end to end, and then in like smaller synths like Vocaloid AI and Div Singer, it's like an hour. You didn't do just 2 hours, did you?
I did not, especially because they were willing to accept those previous songs. So all total, we probably gave them 7 or 8 hours worth of end-to-end, put the song back, because it was like 50 songs. Some of them were 5 minutes in length. And, we tried very hard not to give them like the remixes or the redundant stuff. So, but there were some lush and long holiday pieces in there, and piano ballads, a lot of slow stuff, a lot of jazz stuff, as well as the upbeat rock stuff and band stuff. Yeah, the Latin piece was from my holiday album. I did a cover of Piezu. And so, of course, we didn't want to leave that out for them. And the beauty, too, was that they only needed my lead vocal. They didn't, as much as I love doing harmonies, they didn't even need that for their purposes. So, yeah, quite right. Because they were training their system with the sounds and not the actual content per se. The content all remained mine to distribute as I wanted, and that was something that I was really clear with them about, and I was very happy about, that this new music that we were recording with them in mind would not kind of be hidden for their purposes only, but then ultimately I could release it publicly as well once I finished cultivating the music around it and did the final master recording.
So to just kind of quickly define something for our listeners, your bank uses SynthesizerV AI. AI in this context means that you provided the data of you singing naturally, and then Dreamtonics would basically train their software to reconstruct that voice from scratch. While prior to that, in the past 20 years of vocal synthesis, like Vocaloid 1 came out in 2004, we used a system called concatenative or sample-based, where you had to record like the really flat tones of a very specific phonetic script, and then the bank would source directly from that audio rather than rebuilding it. You had that like initial anxiety of like thinking you would have to do phonetic capturing, but then you were just able to go straight into it with your vocals. So I think it would be fair to go as far as to say that it was the workflow of making an AI voice bank that kind of allowed you to immediately hop onto this project without that kind of prior preparation, in a way.
Yeah, truly. And I mean, because I am a keyboardist and I do have, my own Alesis that I love to play with and have touched MIDI before, I think that's exactly why I did think it was probably more like the 2004 Vocaloid thing, because I know what was sampled from my keyboard to get those instrument voices in there. And, at the same time, why, at least in its earlier iterations, we as keyboardists and people who used synthesizers would get frustrated sometimes that the sound that was sampled would only have been sampled for a particular stretch of notes. So when you get into the high end or the low end that was sort of faked and massaged, it got very empty on those higher notes. It would sound very tinny and very screechy, or the low notes would sound really muddy because they were actually recorded as a middle C, and then they sort of faked it down to the lower note,
Yeah, we do have a similar system, both in the commercial and in the homebrew scene when we do sample based, where it's like we record at one range, but then we like to record like an array of pitches so that way we can capture those like wider characteristics. But it gets very funny because it's like you also want to make sure it's not too dissonant, because it's like, I'm just gonna go from F straight up, just up to G, just go up one, and then it's just immediately like shouting samples. So it's that dissonance that you have to really watch out for. And so I feel like while there are preferences at the end of the day of who in the community likes to use concatenative and who likes to use AI, it's kind of nice knowing that like at least the process we're using right now was less of a goddamn nightmare for you on your end.
Truly. And I did worry. Like, I mean, we had a few meetings where they began to discuss, and I think that they were, as you and I have discussed, a little more accustomed in their earlier work to sitting in on the sessions with talent, especially if they were remote. But we were very fortunate because I was recording in a professional studio that all my last 3 albums have been recorded in. We had a very, great ISO booth. We had master control where Robert was sitting, who appeared with me in the interview last week. So we had, and the real beauty of that too was that because we recorded all of those songs from all of those albums, plus the new songs, all in that same space, there was a consistency across all of those samples. They'd all been recorded in the same room. They were probably all recorded on the same microphone. But they also had the benefit of being recorded over a stretch of time. So like my Christmas album, I think, was mostly recorded in 2020-ish. And then those last few samples we gave Dreamtonics before we wrapped up the project, and the batches we sent them were done around the summer of 2022. So there's like a 3-year span there of my voice on days that I had allergies, like today, or a day when I was singing really clearly and I was really warmed up, or there was a wide breadth of different days and different performance types. And we did have like the Mariah Carey song in there with the really high notes, but also the really low notes, and the breathy notes, but also the like booming loud notes. So I think that did probably really help them train the AI. Yeah, it was really wonderful too to be able to retain those rights and know that I could kill two birds with one stone, and that the recording that I was doing for this project could still snowball forward into something else as we went along. And I have released some of those songs, just not that last few handful that we hadn't finished the music yet for, that we're getting back to now.
Yeah, and I think it's also just nice knowing that it's like, in the AI production process, there wasn't like a very strict direction at play in which they wanted to try and keep you at a consistent tone as possible, potentially like sacrificing the expressiveness of the bank, as you kind of put, or to re-put what you've kind of told to me. It's almost like the process was kind of like a melting pot of the many different stages of Natalie, as it were. And I also think, despite your like initial uncertainty with phonetic capturing, I think it would also please some of the linguistic nerds in our fandom to know that in studying theatre, you actually do know IPA.
I do, yes. In fact, we used to send each other like love notes and notes in school in IPA, those of us who were in my theater class, because then the teachers couldn't read them most of the time, right? Like it's just encrypted enough that you can reveal some secrets. Oh, I like Will over in, and it was brilliant. And it kept our skills sharp, like, because we used it for more than just what they taught it to us for articulation in theater for, because of course one of their main uses was the intention that we could perform in a different language and not have to know the language fluently. We could just read the IPA to get the intonation of the pronunciation and all of that. But it also helped to kind of level out our accents, as it were. I grew up in a city, 16th largest city in the US, but there were some people in class with me that could have grown up farther out in the sticks, or in areas where the accents were a bit different. So their intention was sort of to equalize that and give us a standard American dialect, and to also help us hear the difference in inflections from other places like Boston or California, to hear different accents that were out there. So if we had to play one of those regions, we would be a little bit more informed in that. But yeah, I loved learning IPA. I still, every now and then, I'll still kind of write in that. I need to refresh myself sometimes on the schwa and things like that. But I found it really helpful. And I kind of wish that every vocalist in person who did voiceovers had that background, because I think a lot of people don't have exposure to that. And it was really informative.
Pig Latin for theatre kids. You love to see it.
You're muted.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Yes. You mentioned, of course, throughout this whole process that it was all recorded remotely as well as being pre-existing stems, so anything that was new, you were able to just do it remotely from a studio of your choosing. So that basically means you did not go to Tokyo, contrary to all of the rumors that we like to spread around of like, oh, what if Kanru just like flies all the voice talent to Tokyo because Dreamtonics is so specific about getting all of their bank voice providers to use their setups. As any kind of social community, we are up to our knees in conspiracy theories, and we once had an American English bank that got delayed due to COVID travel restrictions. They were an American voice actress, and Dreamtonics weren't able to fly them them out to Tokyo, so the bank had to be delayed. So we were just there like, I wonder if they do that for everyone.
Well, and maybe that was the point in time when they decided, maybe we should have some options. And I mean, hey, if they want to fly me out to Tokyo, I will show up anytime they please. But no, I did not have that opportunity. Well, because we were approached too in January of 2022, and then we finished summer. So while I don't think we were in strict lockdown during some of that time, people were still masking, group events were still being avoided. So working remotely was ideal at the time, just to kind of play it safe.
Kind of scrolling back to just the overall, like, impact of all of this, I can only imagine just the overall level of shock when all of this started, because the way Dreamtonics' work ethic appears to be from like a consumer/pundit perspective is they made the engine and then they just make the voices with no strings attached. We're very much not used to that. We very rarely get a company that just, they make a good piece of software and then they just push it out the door and say, okay, enjoy kids. With Natalie, she's not only named after you, but she isn't even given a fictional identity or mascot. She's just a lettered logo. So as far as Vsynth companies go, Dreamtonics sound very unassuming to work for. Like I don't know if you could have predicted any of it just based on their overall brand. Like they very much have the vibe of just like they were a tech company that hired you for some kind of like Alexa adjacent software. That seems to be the vibe.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and I mean, I think at the time I knew ways it could be used, but I didn't have a clear sense of who all those end users would be. They did tell us a little bit about the market that they would probably be reaching for, and I did know it would probably skew, in that like teens, 20s, 30s vicinity, and appeal to a certain subset of people that were tech savvy that way. But I could only imagine the ways that it would be used, and didn't probably foresee that like a well-known video game composer would be using my voice bank as a way to demo something, or that it would develop such a big following. So yeah, it was kind of wild. I think one of the early questions that people asked me on Twitter when my identity was revealed was, why didn't you speak up sooner? Why didn't you tell us sooner?
Because I didn't know, bestie.
Yeah, I never hid it, and I mean, people in my circles here had always known that I had worked on this AI thing, or I had done this software tech company thing. The only thing that I really had to show for it at the time was that one video of Amazing Grace where they used my voice bank to sort of show a sample. And every now and again, if it came up in conversation, I would show people that video, But when it had been sent to me on Instagram, it was just starting to gain some traction and traffic. So I didn't realize how much it was catching fire until I came back to that video a few weeks ago and saw that now it had 74,000 views. And I was like, oh, that's a few more views than it had last time I looked at it. What's going on here? So it was wild to see just how creative this community has been, how much it's caught fire, how impassioned and creative that community is. And, you were so gracious to give me a walkthrough of the software so I could kind of see how similar it is to some of the software that I already use. But it's also wild to me to see just how much detail is put into just the vocals alone. When I think about the other instruments that are involved, you and I have talked about how in Adobe Audition, back when I was recording most of my stuff at home in my bedroom, I would have 38 tracks of this synth voice and, this string and this piano and this harpsichord in the background and this beat, and plus all my vocals and harmonies, like 38 different tracks that I'd be mixing. And I don't think, I mostly played with the volume and maybe a little Doppler or pan effect on them, but I don't think I went in there and like fine-tuned the attack or, some of the things that people do all the time in the vocal synth community with such minutia, such fine detail to go into each one of those stems and tailor make it so it all sits quite so well together. Like I was focused a lot on the overall mix and making sure that the keyboard didn't compete with the vocal, or the vocal didn't outshine the background track, especially for my songs like Breathing Hope, where I had the big lush acapella open and everything like that. I think like maybe on the tracks where it was strictly acapella, I might have gone in and done some fine tuning of that attack. But seeing, how much work the community as a whole puts into every single track they make using that vocal synth technology, and the fine granular controls of making it more soulful or more bold, or all of that is so beautiful to see. And I wish that I had some of those tools a decade ago. I probably would have gone completely overboard and be a little OCD about it, as I am in the studio. So maybe in some ways it's good that it didn't, because I would just be buried in my bedroom still in my studio.
I do have this kind of image in my head of just if you got into this sooner, I just imagine you being a very, very particular tuner of where you would just be over the slightest note. Because it's kind of that, it was that discussion that I had with you before when we were chatting privately of just, I do wonder if you took a professional singer and if you sat them in front of a vocal synth, if kind of their singing expertise would give them an idea of how exactly they're able to incorporate those vocal dynamics, because it's just all of those little envelope curves that kind of show how a note can be orchestrated, but then all of the little expressions and details on top of that. As a matter of fact, one of the techniques that I like to use myself when I use SynthV AI is we don't have a vocal fry setting. We don't have a way of initiating vocal fry. So what I like to use is we had it for non-AI banks, but it never got re-implemented for AI banks. And so we like to work with the theory of maybe it just sounds like crap, so they didn't want to roll it out. So what I do as a workaround is I just do a pitch that just goes all the way down to octave 1, and then it immediately curves up in less than a millisecond, and that kind of places an artificial fry. So it's finding all of those little details, and I think that's what we like to accentuate as a community, of where it's just we have so much of a fascination in how the singing voice works and how to manually reincorporate it onto these little robot voices that we have, that it's there's so much of a manual process to it that even when we start using AI, that's why we want to separate it from other AI mediums that are a bit more automated, where they're more generative.
Robert and I work together a lot of times when we have the time and opportunity. We do an early vocal recording, and I'll sit with that and I'll listen to it in the car. I'll listen to the mix, not just the music, but just how the vocal volume is sitting. And sometimes I'll listen to the early takes and I'll be it's not colorful enough. I need to be a little more quiet and breathy on that part. I need to have a little more gumption and get a little more cry in this part, or I need to be more emotive in this section. I need to build it more. It needs to have more of a crescendo. That verse 2 needs to sound a little more different than the verse 1. And all of that same stuff, like you say, that you are kind of doing in the software to kind of give it that dynamic and that texture, I am mentally preparing for. And then when I go back into the studio, I try to take all those little notes that I gave myself internally in there with me. I'll even put it in my lyric sheet sometimes. I'll embolden something or italicize something or put an asterisk next to something to remind myself, do a harder attack on this, or don't forget to fully enunciate on that word, because sometimes Robert will pick on me because in a loving way. He's kind of like a brother in a way.
With love.
With love, absolutely love. Because sometimes I'll get so emotive that I'll drop the D or the T at the end of a word or a sentence, and it'll kind of get swallowed in my rounding off that note. So he'll be don't drop that D, just kind of come back to it. But all of it, we try really hard to give it that texture and that sharpness and that crispness. I do recall that with Dreamtonics in particular, we had to be especially careful on the louder songs to not let headphone bleed come through. As we did have the benefit of them being okay with our recording the vocals against the music backdrop, but of course what we sent them was just the vocals. So if the beat was really loud, or the strings were really loud on some of those Christmas tracks, they would hear that coming through. So some of those things I did have to revoice and keep the backing track down as low as possible, which is hard for me because I love to be immersive. I want that not to be so loud it's going to give me a headache or damage my eardrums, but to be loud enough that I feel live, that I feel like the instrumentalists are with me. And so I think of anything, I went into the project expecting it to be tedious with the 1 1 1 1 2 3, but instead the hard part was that on some of those songs, especially the dance and EDM tracks, I had to go in with the beat as quiet as possible, with the strings on the beautiful lush ballads as quiet as possible, and be almost on the verge of not being able to hear what key I was in my having one ear off of the headphones so that I could try to keep my volume as much in control as possible. That was probably the hardest part for me personally.
Yeah. I mean, as a fun little bit of insight of like what parts of the audio the AI actually uses. Of course, it uses your phonetics. It uses all of that phonetic data from you actually singing. But there are also actually two bonus phonemes. One is just pure silence, so it just completely cuts the audio. And then we also have another phoneme that we like to use called CL. And it's basically just like some white noise that's part of your data, of you like closing your voice. And that's what we actually use in order to artificially place glottal stops in, from whenever we need to place a glottal stop in between lyrics. So I've actually, while I've been using the Natalie bank, it's one of those things I've been noticing of just like, whenever a vocal phrase ends, or whenever I place a glottal stop, it even captures the way you close your voice, or it even captures that like slight breathiness that you kind of orchestrate at the end of certain consonants and vowels. So I think it's just really interesting to see how much of that expression is kind of like locked in and kind of kept in place with the bank. And with that kind of like characterization and that expression and how much people can read off your voice, that kind of comes through in the visuals. Of course, your database lacks a pre-designed mascot, but I'm particularly a fan of the quote posts of like everyone just showing you all the like fan-made designs that they made of the Natalie banks, all these like fan-made avatars of like what the character is that they see when they hear your voice. I particularly like the posts that you make on the ones where you just like you quote post them and then you just go, I swear I have that exact same outfit in my wardrobe, because to me it shows like this really endearing element of like how just based on the voice alone, they're just able to interpret this design from scratch that just feels very you.
Yeah, that was really mind-blowing for me too, and I get that based on some of the music genres that they're able to use my voice for, which I do as human Natalie sing in real life, that of course people in the R&B space or the soul space or the power ballad space, we do all kind of have a particular fashion that we lean into, no doubt. But it is kind of wild to see like, those lace-up shoes with like the ballet ribbon ties that go up the ankle. That's not a popular style. That's not like, and I have and the shoes that I have like that, that I finally found, I did wear them in one photo shoot, but they're on my Behance page. You can see the shoes untied on the floor in front of me, but the ones that I have are actually for ballroom dancing, and they're brilliant. Yeah, I know, right? So they're really sturdy and they look really small, but they're made with like such metal inside to hold the arch. And the ties are elasticized instead of being regular ribbons, so they really stay on well. So I have worn those for Grammy events and photo shoots and all kinds of things. But I don't think, like, even people in my everyday life here who don't see me at those events necessarily don't know that I own that pair of shoes. So to see this community just imagine that I have that pair of shoes in red, I'm like, I would love that pair of shoes in red. I wonder if they sell them in red. My pair is black to make sure it goes with everything. But yeah, it was really wild to see just how much people could pick up on from my personality or my side hobbies or things like that, or curly hair, that they naturally put in that avatar. And where it differs, that doesn't bother me. I see it as a separate entity, like you and I were talking about. Like me as a person, I would never wear pink, and obviously my skin tone is fairly pale in comparison to some of the avatars that have been made for me. But I think that's beautiful. I love that everybody who has made those avatars has had the creativity to give it the character that they see in their own minds and that suits their own work. If you're copying a particular artist, you're doing a cover with my voice bank of a particular, 20s jazz, that flapper image is gorgeous. Like I could never disagree with that or feel badly about that, because what a beautiful representation of my voice. So the ways that really similar are beautiful, but also the ways that it's different are, in my mind, equally beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that kind of, like, expression and relatability of where just, like, it's the ways in which the avatars are different, it shows so much versatility and shows so much diversity as well. Like, especially in, as we've kind of discussed before in private, is that how, a lot of the works that your voice kind of revolved around is a lot of soul material, and soul is kind of one of the interpreted genres of, like, what the bank is good for. And so as a result, we also have a lot of POC mascots. We have a lot of very dark-skinned mascot interpretations of Natalie because of that kind of soul and kind of acknowledging that that kind of, like, these are genres of music that originated from black spaces. So it kind of feels it kind of feels nice knowing that, like, even now that we've gotten to know you, and even now that we know now we know about you and your identity, it's like, nonetheless, it's been this wonderful opportunity for creatives to kind of reclaim the originating points of where those genres and vocal styles came from.
I could not have said it better myself. In fact, knowing that we would probably touch on this topic today, I had planned to say exactly that, you know, jazz, rock, pop, these power ballads, all of that comes from that community. And I am so lucky that I've been able to borrow from them. And I work very hard to make sure I'm not appropriating from them, but, you know, to passed back to who originated that sound. You know, I have no problem admitting that I grew up listening to Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey, and I even honestly I did grow up in some black churches where I was the token white girl on the choir. You know, you and I have talked a little bit about song structure and songwriting and feminine and masculine rhymes and internal rhyming, but a vamp is a song segment that's so specific to worship or soulful songs that it's kind of different, like classical rondos. You know, the format and the layout of the song is just different, but it has so much heart in it, and I think I've been able to put that in my music because I had that exposure.
So as we kind of like went over all of the fan-made avatars that kind of associate with your bank and the essence of the voice bank, as it were, even as someone who owns and records their own bank, I am kind of curious about your perception of it. Like, if you see it as an extension of yourself, or if you see it as a descendant of yourself, especially on account of the lack of design and you sharing the same name. Like, whenever I would discuss the bank with you in conversations, I would always ensure to phrase it with, like, a qualifier like Natalie AI or the voice bank, because I wonder if it would sound weird if I refer to Natalie as a separate person.
I don't think it would now, and especially not with you, because I know enough about your personality and your heart now to kind of hear what you're saying. But I think it was startling that first day last month when I went to that YouTube video to play it for my friends and show them, and all the comments underneath that video with 74,000 views were speaking of me as, like, Natalie, a third party person, you know, and saying, like, oh, I don't like the new Natalie, I prefer the original Natalie download, or, you know, Natalie is so expressive, or, you know, Natalie is my favorite voice bank. And, like, to hear them use my name that way, like, it didn't seem like they were taking my name in vain or something. It wasn't like that, but it was just like, I think it gave me that realization that the voice bank truly is a separate entity from me and has a life of its own and is part of discussions that, you know, for a beautiful moment, I was a fly on the wall hearing these conversations, reading these conversations that had happened many months ago, and going, that's so funny. Like, that some of those remarks are the same remarks that I, human Natalie, hear about my enunciation or the brightness or the expressiveness of my voice, but to hear them attributed to my voice bank was really, I think, surreal in part. And you and I talked about this privately before, because I think there is a big part of me that instinctively always thought that part of the reason people said those nice things to me wasn't just because of my performance, but was also because of who they knew me to be as a person, and knowing my backstory and knowing the causes that I'm an advocate for, or, the particular songs that I have created human content for. But to see people saying those same things, not knowing who I was, not knowing what my catalog is, not knowing anything about my real life personality that I've been public about on my social media over the last couple of decades, was really eye-opening in some kind of way that I can't even quite articulate. That, like you were saying earlier with the fashion stuff, that they could take that away from hearing my voice independent of me, disembodied from me, was really wild, because I had not previously seen all of that attributed to my voice alone. And I do think there's a way in which it has made me maybe even more hyper-vigilant about my vocal care, if that makes sense. Like, I've always been very, there are things I will not do in the world just to protect my voice, or, habits that I have, regimens that I have to protect my voice, because not only do I rely on it for singing, I also rely on it as a public speaker and a voiceover talent, and in the past, a radio host. But I think it has given me a deeper appreciation and a powerful reminder of why I go to the links that I go to protect my voice, when I see the kind of impact it's had on people, even independent of the songs that I have personally released, and being able to see them record songs that I've wanted to record, doing covers of Evanescence and Celine Dion and all kinds of different people that I would love to hop in the studio and record, but they are creating those songs themselves. It's such a compliment. And also just so beautiful to see people take ownership of it. I think one of the other kind of surreal things was that, especially joining in that conversation in progress, or, coming to see those comments after the fact, there is a way in which it felt, not too morbidly, like I was walking into my own funeral, that like the Natalie voice bank was in the coffin and everybody's focus was toward that, and they're saying all these lovely things like, oh, she had such an expressive voice, and I really liked the original Natalie, da, 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 da. And then my kind of stepping into the back of that chapel and going, yeah, I had a lot of fun making that really expressive, and then there's this record scratch where the entire chapel looks back at me and is like, wait, this is you we're talking about, and sort of belatedly collecting all these beautiful tributes that people have posted online, both in their comments and the songs that they've covered, people commenting on those covers and going, oh, I love the way that you used Natalie for this, it is this sort of surreal thing that I think Virginia Woolf and Van Gogh were probably cheated out of, that I have been able to experience, wherein, I'm alive, but I'm hearing the things that people are saying about me almost as if I were not. And it's really heartwarming and touching in a way that I can't quite put words to.
It's honestly really interesting to think about that there was these 2 years of the Natalie voice bank being out commercially and being part of a public discourse, and there was a way in which you were able to kind of witness an unfiltered discussion about the bank from that kind of detached perspective. Because it's I feel like, just speaking plainly objective here, I feel like it is fair to say that, now that we are familiar with you, and now that we're able to speak to you personally in real time, that it's we do have to put up this almost not dishonesty, but a filter of some kind of being mindful that what we say about the voice can be perceived by you as well.
I totally get that. Just that awareness that I'm in the room now. And I definitely did feel in reading those prior comments that there was not an awareness that I, the human voice provider for the Natalie voice bank, would necessarily ever see those comments. And I think that's part of what made some of them, all of them really, so beautiful to read, is that nobody was saying them for my benefit. Nobody was saying any of them. Yeah, nobody was trying to brown nose or elicit my involvement or collaboration or, kiss up to me in any kind of way. They were purely saying it genuinely, honestly, authentically about this voice bank that they had befriended in so many ways. So I totally get what you mean, that there is that sense that now I could be watching or I could see, and I have joined the SynthV Reddit. I have not joined the SynthV Discord. I'm happy to be in any of those spaces, but I have also been aware that all of the community should still have the freedom to discuss the voice bank without them worrying that I may take it personally or something. I have sort of felt that awareness.
It's kind of like that tip that, like, published authors give to each other, where they're like, stay away from Goodreads, that's for the readers to chat in.
Yes, precisely. Yeah, and I mean, when I was in theater, I would do the same thing. I tended not to read the reviews of my stage work, you know? And I mean, ultimately, whether it was good or bad or neither, news of it would still reach me and went like, oh, the review in the Leo got this kind of vibe, or the review in this got that. I mean, sometimes I have read like the review of my singing on the French TV project, which was all in French. I did see in their French review, written in French, that they accredited me as having a cute American accent.
Oh my
God.
French.
But like, those are the kind of remarks that you're like, okay, I deserve that. Like, you know, that's fitting. It's honest. Like, I've never really read a review that bothers me, you know, even if I may disagree with their perspective, because I know the night that they attended was not the best night. We had sound problems, whatever. I'm still able to look on balance and go, for their experience for that particular moment in time, what they said was accurate to their point of view. But I do think there's this beautiful dichotomy in which I can cherry pick the things that people say and go, yeah, that is true of me. I'm very proud of that, you know. But then if they don't like the Natalie update, I can be like, oh, well, that's the software's problem. You know what I mean? Like, I can draw that line.
Yeah, I do feel like there's this very interesting catch-22 that I feel like even I'm kind of learning myself, being an online presence, is that, like, being a niche internet micro-celebrity, as it were. I feel like there is kind of this, like, line that needs to be towed of where it's like, especially now that we have the ability to interact with our audiences so intimately, there is this expectation of, like, you need to be vigilant and responsive to all criticism, you need to be able to answer inquiries. But it's like, at the same time, I feel like if there is aspects of discourse that is related to you that you willfully do not engage with, I don't feel like that's a display on your inability to have that discussion, but it's just that sometimes people are having their own conversations that it's just good to leave them to have. And I feel like that's something that your voice bank being out in the public before you being out in the community's public eye kind of illustrates that in a way. To kind of explain to our listeners what the update refers to, that is specifically when SynthesizerV incorporated the HDVM model, which was a singing synth model in which the dynamics of a vocal take were ever so slightly randomized, so that every output was ever so slightly unique in some way. But it was a feature that was only trained for one bank, and so every single bank in the collection started to be a little bit distorted because they were just like, why does everybody sound like Chinese singer Weina Hu, well known for voicing Princess Elsa in the Chinese dub of Frozen?
There you go. Indeed. And I mean, who can fault them for that? I mean, anytime you develop new technology, there's going to be bugs in the system and ghosts in the machine.
Of course. But speaking of new technology and ghosts in the machine, AI has become a contentious term. There is absolutely no denying that whatsoever. In fact, there's AI art generation, there's AI music generation. I feel like one kind of example that anecdote that I want to bring up was when there was news articles going around about how tennis and badminton arenas were going to implement a AI spectator system in which the AI automatically commentates the game as it's happening by making real-time analysis of what's going on in the game. And of course there are concerns about that with regards to its accuracy, but also with regards to the livelihoods of those commentators. AI, despite how much of an umbrella it covers, is a very contentious term, and it's not uncommon that we feel the need to address the implications such technology creates. I, for one, am always in an awkward spot where friend groups of mine are professional singers, they're voice actors. Here in Vsynths, we're never not discussing the ethics of AI, because ultimately, as creatives, we don't want to intrude on any industries, we don't want to step on any toes, but ultimately we acknowledge that we are at risk too. We engage in manual mediums like songwriting, like illustration, and like tuning vocal dynamics that we know that we're at risk to and we want to be responsible consumers. So with that in mind, I kind of wanted to hear from you that, like, as the process was going on, if there was any of those anxieties or uncertainties as a voice provider where at least some aspect of your livelihood is from your voice and you are asked to have it duplicated.
Absolutely. And I think immediately, like as soon as I said yes to the project, and I said yes similarly to Meta/Facebook to do an AI rendering of my facial gestures and emotions for their project as well. Both times I was aware that even participating in a project that had any moniker or label of being AI could upset my peers, and that they could judge me for it. They could misunderstand what I was doing. In both cases, you know, I felt like from what I knew of the companies that they were going to use it in a ethical way. But you are also keenly aware, I think there's no escaping, that once you allow that clone or that duplication of you to be made in some way and digitized, that there is always the possibility that someone out there, even if they're an outlier, is going to use it in a way that is counter to what you want. You know, I think with the singing and the voice bank, there's that fear of, oh, maybe somebody will create like a Nazi anthem with my voice or something, you know, and it will sound so genuine because my voice is so authentic in the songs that we recorded for that voice bank. And you hope that like nobody does that, or if they attempt it, that they're quickly shut down. But I have to say, like, as I've gotten to know the Vocalsynth community, I'm so touched by how much they hold each other accountable in this regard, how much they keep this conversation going and are constantly examining everything through that lens of what is the most ethical use here. Are we attributing it to the voice bank? Are we pretending that it's somebody else? And how do we call people out if they do that, you know? And as you say, not overriding the potential for the original voice provider to make money. And I know even on Twitter, when we were talking about the topics we might cover in this interview, immediately what came to my mind was this really beautiful TED Talk, and I forget the lady's name every time, but I shared it on my Twitter so I could bookmark it and return to it. But there's this beautiful TED Talk, I want to say it happens at like South by Southwest, but I could be wrong, where she talks about the fact that in the fashion industry, people who are buying the like fashion knockoffs of Prada or Burberry or Louis Vuitton are not the people who would be buying the real product at that time. They might aspire to later. They might eventually become those customers. But at the point in time when they're buying the $10 knockoff of the $300 purse or, you know, scarf or anything else, they are not that customer at that time. And I feel the same way about, you know, SynthV. I think most of the people in the Vocalsynth community are not in a position to reach out to me personally and hire me to be their demo singer, you know, and or if they have used me as a Vocalsynth or, you know, voice bank for a long time and their circumstances change and now they do have $500,000 budget to create a powerful soundtrack for some movie. Now that they know who I am, they could reach out, you know, but I think the people who are creating those things are operating in a different space. They're bringing a lot of the same talents to it, but they don't have the ability to hire, you know, session singers and do a full mock-up with live instrumentalists to hire string players. So in my view, I don't think that they're cheating people out of that work because that work would not exist if this software did not exist.
I think it's the multiple layers of nuance as well beyond that, of where it's like, it's that they're producing a work that is independent of your career, but it's also a matter of where, in effect, they have bought a work off you as well. This is a work that you've provided as a product, and they have bought it off you, and then you've been subsequently compensated as a result of this. And then I think it's also just the matter of, like, I believe I said to you before in private that, like, I feel like the fine line that we kind of like to toe in this community when it comes to what we like or dislike with AI usage is it's the fine line of where does artistry begin and end. And for us, it's that it's not just that we have the voice that does the singing for us, but it's that we implement the singing ourselves in a way. We are providing that manual touch to produce a result that feels very much us. And I feel like that's one of the core areas to focus on, because at the end of the day, it's not just a matter of what's legal, but it's also a matter of what is right regardless of the law.
Yeah, best practices, and in the spirit of the agreement too, like in all senses where laws are involved or rights are involved. I think sometimes people look at the letter of the law and they try to just adhere to the black and white, but there's always going to be a gray area, especially when you're touching these kinds of topics. And so I think it's so powerful and so important that the community is constantly examining those gray areas and saying, well, what do we do when this arises? Straight away when I began conversing with the Vsynth community on Twitter, quickly people asked me, would you ever be willing to cover one of our original songs that we've composed with your voice bank? And, so all of my composing mind and my marketing mind and my recording academy mind all congeal. And I think, okay, how would that be received? Is it possible? How would I approach it? What would the strategy be? What would the method be? Obviously, it would require permission from the original songwriter, who is absolutely a songwriter. There's no getting around that. I would have to possibly rearrange it to put it back on a human voice. I would want to market it with transparency about how it came to be, but fully acknowledging, as you said, that the human created this at the front and they used the AI voice bank as a tool, as an instrument, and that in a final recording, it was again put back with a human. So all the important pieces were still human. The voice bank was just sort of the introduction and a means to map it out and kind of create the blueprint for it, but a final recording would still be done with a human voice. I was very pleased when I kind of sprung this on Robert during our interview a week ago. Robert and I are very like-minded about our Recording Academy peers, and we know the dynamic of that culture. Much like the Vocalsynth community, there are a lot of opinions in that space and a lot of approaches to things, a lot of different ways that people go about things. And I could foresee that especially some of the older members of the Recording Academy who, are nearing retirement or something, who fought Napster back in the day, might really bristle and feel irritated by the idea of a song that used AI to compose it in any respect, even in this very ethical way. And that I would, if I went down that road, probably have to hold their hand and explain it to them a little bit and help them understand that it wasn't generative, that it wasn't somebody typing a few sentences or a few keyword prompts into an engine and then spitting out a song with no effort. But in fact, it was this human who composed it, arranged it, to such an extent that they went in and fine-tuned so much of that they frankly put in more effort than some regular instrumentalists or regular vocalists might at the end of the day, to create this beautiful work that I, collaborated with them and then took and put back on a human voice. And I think that there is also something beautiful in that creation process that the AI introduces. And while I think you're right, understandably, people see AI as a threat, and there are very valid reasons for that. There is also this special spice in that mix that Robert kind of touched on in my interview with him too, that I agree with. And it's basically that AI gives you an opportunity to elevate it. Because when we record on our own, if I were to record, without any collaboration, I'm doing all the guitar, piano parts, I'm singing everything, I'm writing everything, I'm arranging everything. That's going to be limited to what I, Natalie Nicole Gilbert, can do. It's going to be limited to my range, to my guitar playing skills, my piano playing skills. The arrangement is going to be limited to the music I've been exposed to. And as artists, we're always trying to expand those skills. But when you introduce AI into that equation, you are enabling a neutral party to enter the room with you and be a part of that process. And that AI is going to have been exposed to music that I, human Natalie, will never have been exposed to. It may think of I'm attributing the personification to it, as we do, the same way people do with the Natalie voice bank, right? It may think of intervals or chord progressions that I, human Natalie, might not think of, and a human composer like Dokuro may not think of. But it may introduce something into that equation that adds on to what we do. And I think of it more as an addendum. We are still the main contract. We are still the core as humans of that creativity. But just like any instrument where you can slip and make a mistake that you decide to keep, or discover a new chord that you didn't know how to play before you picked it up this time, having that extra component can bring something extra to it. It can put some icing or some spice on it that you incorporate back into what the human portion does. And I think that's where something beautiful can come out of this, you know?
So do you feel like, now that you've taken the time to get to know the community and seen exactly what work your voice has been used for, do you feel like, from a, like, ethics and legality standpoint, if that's given you any new additional insight with regards to, like, how to protect your voice, and if you feel like any of those initial anxieties during the production process changed or created new anxieties or just completely alleviated from getting to know all of us?
I think, first and foremost, the first beautiful thing that I saw as I got to see what the community was creating, and when I kind of opened the door to them and invited them to share with me what they'd been creating with my voice, was that, and perhaps part of it, like we talked about earlier, was down to what the voice bank could do and how similar to my voice, my human voice, it is. People instinctively knew they could use it for power ballads and jazz and all of these things. So I think there was a way in which I was a little surprised to see that even disembodied from me, people were using my voice bank to do the same things that I, Natalie, do. You know, that they're recording a lot of the same covers that I have in fact covered. You know, I immediately also saw somebody had done an Adele cover of Easy on Me, and I was like, oh look, I did that in reality. Like, I did that as a so it was kind of beautiful to see that we were so in synchronicity, that we were doing the same things, approaching it different ways. I think there was definitely a relief to see that the way that my voice bank was being used was absolutely in manners and on songs and projects that would make me proud. And, you know, that extra element, I don't think that I was aware perhaps at the outset that my voice would be allowed or even programmed to sing in other languages. So I think that was an aspect that I hadn't considered in advance, that my voice bank would be able to sing in Japanese or Cantonese or Mandarin or Spanish, and, you know, languages I may never have the opportunity to be fluent in myself. So that was really gorgeous to see, and to see that voice, you know, to see that rendered in a way that's really believable. In fact, I don't know if I told you this. When I shared one of the Spanish songs with a friend of mine, maybe I did tell you this, who speaks Spanish fluently, and he's been teaching me some colloquialisms and some cultural phrases and helping me improve my pronunciation of Spanish. I sent him just via chat, hey, you know, if my voice does a song in Spanish, do I get points for learning Spanish? And how is my pronunciation? And I used quotation marks like that because I thought he remembered the video I had shown him from YouTube, and he was one of those two people I showed it to him.
And so it was an output of the cross-lingual model, where, because again, the only data that was used for the bank was English, but due to SynthV's features, the bank itself can also sing in Japanese, in Cantonese, in Mandarin, in Spanish. So this was one of the Spanish takes that you sent him.
So one of the Spanish takes, like you said, all we gave the bank was English and Latin. And when I shared it with him, he immediately responded, yeah, that's a really good take. And I thought he knew it was the voice bank. But then the next time he saw me in person, he was like, how did you do that? I didn't realize that your pronunciation had come along so far. And I was like, wait, no, Renee. That wasn't me. It wasn't human me. It was my voice bank. And it was so close to my voice and so fluent in his native tongue. He had not realized that it wasn't actually me, human Natalie Nicole Gilbert, who had done that song. And I think it was the song Hueves or something like that. So I think that really speaks to the quality of the software. It speaks to the skill of the person who crafted that song. I apologize that I don't know that user's name off the top of my head.
I'll cite it.
I always try hard to attribute where I can't have any ability to caption. But then I think it also just makes me so pleased that material that I gave to Dreamtonics, having only, you know, a tip of the iceberg understanding of how it could be used so successfully, that what I gave them enabled it to come out so cleanly that way, even when when my voice bank wasn't singing in my native tongue. So that was really beautiful. But then, yeah, as I engaged in these conversations, it also kind of made me realize, not only with respect to Dreamtonics, but also with Facebook and Meta, who I did that other AI capture work for, that I need to designate in my will how this is handled in my absence, and it's one of those things where it's like, well, I may take the time to spell that out and it may never come into play, but as sure as I don't spell it out, then something will arise, 70 years from now when I pass, and somebody will be like, oh, I wonder, if Natalie would have felt okay with our using her voice bank or her, AI generated facial gestures from Meta or Facebook like this. And so I am going to take that time to delineate and just not only specify who those people are in my will, but also give them a separate letter to kind of designate some ideas of what is on the thumbs up side of that and what is on the thumbs down part of that equation that I would prefer my voice not be used for. And I know that, like, while I'm living, as we touched on, there's always going to be that possibility that somebody might do something that is outside of my control. But here's the other part of the equation, and you and I have talked about this, that I think that people can do more with it that I'm proud of because I gave my consent and my permission than what people might have tried to do with my voice if I had not gone through this avenue, this very public, commercially released avenue of letting myself be captured. It's as many interviews as I have done and as much a cappella singing as I have done. If somebody wanted to capture my voice without my permission, they probably could. There's probably 2 hours or 1 hour worth of material out there that they could string together to create something without my permission,
So it's almost like, in a way, it feels like one of the layers of security that comes from your voice being used for a commercial bank is that not only is there the consent and there's the compensation, but there's also the fact that someone going out of their way to purchase the bank that you consented to make, it almost acts as like a layer of decency in a way. It says it's already a good representation of character for that user if they've gone out of the way to purchase the commercial good that is your voice.
Absolutely. I think it kind of creates that threshold. And I think also, because I did it in partnership and in concert with other individuals and with a software company, there is also that layer of protection that if somebody tried to use the Natalie voice bank in some really awful way, it wouldn't be just me who would be damaged by that. It would also be the software company. And so, in an ideal world, they would also have the room and space and perhaps desire to handle that, on the commercial level as well. So it also gives me that layer of protection that I'm not doing it singularly and solely on the side in a vacuum, but there are these extra layers of protection. That's a very good way to phrase it, because we went about doing it this way. And even in the case of Meta and Facebook, when I did the AI capture for them against a green screen for a couple of hours, letting them capture my facial gestures and emotions and telling them stories, they were very specific in their case that none of those, and we'll see how it holds true, right? Knock on wood. But supposedly, according to my contract with them, the end result for them is not supposed to look exactly like me or sound exactly like me. It is supposed to be an amalgamation with other people to create a realistic human image of facial gestures and vocalics and emotion that is not supposed to too closely render to exactly me in a way that could be creepy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nothing too uncanny to see here, folks. Nothing too uncanny.
Yes, no uncanny valley here.
I think it is really just interesting to see that, like, all of the additional insight that you've been given from myself and other parties of just, like, what exactly it is can be accomplished with your bank also kind of gave you that additional layer of, like, where exactly specifically that you can apply those layers of security to. Because as I kind of told you before, we have had many instances in the Vocalsynth industry of experimenting with Vocalsynth technology to create voice banks of vocalists who had previously passed away. One famous example being Wikiloid, which was a voice bank that was basically a resurrection of sorts of a famous Japanese singer done by Yamaha Corporation. Yamaha really like resurrecting dead people. We don't really talk about that. But I don't think there is really an aspect in the industry just yet, knock on wood, wherein we've had a voice bank that has released and then the voice provider has subsequently passed away. And so I feel like it's good to know that, like, one of the things that came to mind with this additional insight is just knowing that we have many voice banks in the industry that still see use to this day, and they came out 10, 20 years ago. So it's only wise to think about how could this bank be used later down the line, and should I write out some guidelines so that my estate can watch over that?
Absolutely. And I think, as with all things, especially technology-based, you have to be forward-thinking and recognize that even though terms of service, might only permit these things today, terms of service change all the time, and especially as the technology itself changes and users want to do more things with that software as they've gotten accustomed to having certain freedoms. So, as I do map that out, I do want to be thinking ahead. I want to think about VocaFlex. I want to think about, the fact that, even now, a lot of our entertainment contracts that are drafted say, to be used in perpetuity throughout the universe.
I love that line. I love that line so much. It's like, 'cause they literally make this is like my favorite thing to tell people, that like contracts literally do set precautions so that they have the right to use your work just in case tomorrow everything becomes cyberpunk. Just in case we got space stations on Mars, we need to be able to set up precautions so that when we set up a new colony on Mercury or wherever, that we can still make covers using Natalie SynthV.
Well, and this is a bit of a tangent, but related. The thing is that all of the new technology is always predicated on what came before, I had the opportunity to work on the show For All Mankind for a number of episodes in both season 1 and season 4 as an actress. And I think it's released now, so I think I can, without going into too much detail, mention that in my season 4 work with them, we wore these, because this technology was in some of the earlier seasons that are publicly out now too. We had this wristwatch that did tell time, but also gave us radiation alerts, because in season 4, my character was on the Martian space station, populated with mostly humans. So we, at all times, we had to be aware of what the radiation level was around us. But it's still just a watch, and it's essentially a smartwatch. It's just got another feature added on, right? And so, it was such a wonderful experience to work on that set and be surrounded by a set that essentially looks like Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's like just a little bit in the future, but just enough. But even, when you walked me through the SynthV software, I immediately saw, oh, this has so many of the same buttons that my DAW, Adobe Audition, has. And then I thought, well, of course it would, because it's all predicated on what a regular soundboard looks like. A regular soundboard has the M button for mute and the S button for solo and the pan knob for panning. And all of that is built into all of these DAWs and all of these music softwares, because they know a lot of the people using them had that hands-on experience with the real thing tangibly in the real world. So that same knowledge is going to transfer over to our use in the software. So even though the way we use these things may change a lot in the future, it's still going to be built on the foundation of the way that we're doing it already, I think. I want to be forward-thinking, not only in how I set that up for my estate and anybody who might have to do that in my absence if I was incapacitated or gone, but I also want to think about that for myself, because moving forward, if I've been approached in 2022 and 2023 to be part of AI things, chances are I'm going to be approached again in the future. And I've already had one of my voiceover clients say he would like to create a small avatar of me just to do my pickup recordings. And I would still be paid for it, but I would not have to set aside studio time for it. And he would pay me at a lower level since I didn't have to be there in human form in person. And I'm okay. And he checked with me first and we talked about it and we would set aside that rate. I'm okay with all of that. And, you know, as you and I have said, like, consent is hotter. Consent is like what
Consent
makes
is
it
hotter. Thank you.
So I think that's the big part of that equation. But I do think it helps for you to spell out that consent in every way that you can and to constantly be updating that with your new knowledge of new expansions and new technology as it arrives.
Very good. So here we're coming to a little intermission in the interview. We're going to take a little break from the interrogations and we're going to play a little game.
Oh, no.
As part of her introduction to all things Vocalsynth, I think it's time that we introduce Natalie to her family members, colleagues, and compatriots with a segment that I like to call the Vocalsynth Runway. Natalie, I'm going to be showing you a curated selection of 7 commercial mascots from all walks of the Vocalsynth industry, and we want to hear from you your honest impressions of their designs, their fashion choices, followed by a rating out of 5 stars for each one. Are you ready to play?
I am ready. 5 stars being best.
5 stars being best, and then we'll say, like, you can use 0.5s if you want to be specific, with half a star being the lowest.
Nice. I'm
Okay.
game. Let's do it.
So firstly, we have MIKU, the first ever Japanese vocalist for the Vocaloid engine, released in 2004, and here she's sporting her V3 design when she got upgraded to Vocaloid 3 in 2014.
Now, is this the gal who was in that video that you sent me, who was hearing her Vocaloid voice for the first time?
No, but we do have her coming up. We get excited.
Oh, very good. Okay.
So-
The avatar looks like her a little bit and favors that real life person just a bit. I love the boots though. Like, I would absolutely wear those. I love the color of the red. I always laugh a little bit when people put things constraining the neck on vocalists. I'm not saying it's not done, clearly it is, but even very early, some of my earliest dance performances, they made us wear a ribbon around the neck. And for the people who were only dancing, that was one thing, but for those of us that were singing, it was a nightmare. So I think if it were a real vocalist, a human vocalist, that could be impeding. So that would be the only thing where I would like maybe take away half a star because it's just uncomfortable for a vocalist. But I love this outfit. It looks like it would be really great on a hot stage under the lights. Love the hairdo. I always love that like shard of
that little
hair.
chestnut fuck-ass bob, as we like to call it.
Oh, it's out of your way. It doesn't like whiplash you in the eyes when you do a turn on stage. But I mean, for the boots alone and the color of the red and the expressiveness, I think this is 4.5. This is pretty great.
We are coming out swinging today, aren't we? Next up, we have Megurine Luca. She is a vocalist for Vocaloid 2 in 2009, who was Vocaloid's very first bilingual vocalist, releasing with support for both Japanese and English.
I love the open slit skirt here. I definitely have a number of them like that too. And the detail on the edges reminds me of a mini that my partner painted for me for D&D, which is kind of brilliant. Love the long hair. Again, we have the stuff around the neck, so for me, that's like,
Take
that would be
notes,
so
everyone. Take notes.
But I again have to spotlight those boots. Those boots are fabulous. Would wear. That's amazing, especially with the gold color. It gives it sort of this superhero vibe to it, you know, while also still maintaining a bit of that Japanese culture because of the way that the dress is fashioned and fit. So yeah, I think I would give this a 4.5 too. I promise that won't be my answer for everybody, but this one is really good. I like the lighting on this one too.
I mean,
especially.
honestly, I have no qualms with another 4.5. One other detail I want to point out, because while I was fetching these images, it literally, like, because I was looking at these close up while I was fetching the images to send you, and it literally only just crossed my mind that the gauntlet that Luca has across her right arm, it looks very similar to kind of like an acoustic plugin that you would boot up on your workstation almost, because you've got like the little dials, you've got the small display there. Like, it's this, the parent company who work with this series of vocalists, Krypton, they do very much like to focus on those like technological signatures of like they are digital instruments, so they have characteristics of those. So that's a detail that I've literally only just noticed in my like 8 years of being part of this fandom.
Nice! That's gorgeous. I love it.
Now, this is Sachiko. So she is an Enka voice bank, voiced by Sachiko Kobayashi, who was 61 at the time of the bank's release in 2015. The video in question that I sent you and you were referring to is a very well-known video in the fandom in which Sachiko-san was being shown her voice bank, and so she would play samples and she would just go, "Oh damn, that's me!"
Wow, this one has such detail. And I think they had shown this one maybe in that video off to the side or something quite like it. I love the headdress and the detail of all the accoutrements here, plus the background. Like, I really like the bow and almost the military look of the skirt, like almost like British buttons or something. But the flower detail too is just really gorgeous. And the checker detail you wouldn't think would fit this kind of design, but it works somehow. This also gives me a little bit of Mortal Kombat vibes, I'm not gonna lie.
It does look a little bit like a Tekken 8 render almost.
Right? Yes. But yeah, that's really beautiful. The coloring, the lighting, all of it. So I think that one has to have 5 stars.
A 5, perfect. It's good to see that some people have appreciation for Sachiko. Contestant number 4 is where we're going to start with our adjacencies. We're going to be giving you someone from the SynthV space. So this right here is Solaria. So Solaria was a fellow SynthV bank voiced by American singer Emma Rowley. This is one of Eclipse Sound's vocalists, who are also the makers of Saros and Asterion.
This is beautiful. I love that deep red tone that's like gem tone is so gorgeous. You kind of can't go wrong with that. It looks so royal and so classic. I love the tie-in to the name of Solaria, the stars and the headdress. She kind of looks like almost like a Roman warrior with that shoulder strap there on the side. Always the great shoes in this community. I can see you guys, you know, one of my real life loves is Fluvogs. They make these beautiful, nostalgic, classic timeless shoes, and I can see all of you guys would have an equal affection for them. I love the cape here and that it's kind of see-through, it appears. Also loving the use of a dark black tight. I can't tell you throughout my life, like, it never bothers me, but it does tend to catch people's attention that I often wear black tights from my dance days. So it's always good for me to see people use that in a fashion sense, because especially here in California, people are like, isn't that hot? Why are you wearing tights when it's like summer weather? And I'm like, no, it's not nearly as uncomfortable as you think. Also, I'm neurodivergent and I get cold easily, so it works for me.
Mood. When I have to explain to people why I'm wearing black jeans in 25 degrees.
Yes, right? Yes. I mean, honestly, I consider myself self-diagnosed, even though I have been assessed. But that was one of the tipping points for me when I was following the actually autistic hashtag, was that people were readily saying how they liked to bundle up even in warm weather. And I was like, it's me, you know? And once I started to put those pieces together, I was like, this makes so much sense. And I kind of get the sense that Solaria feels the same way. I mean, that cape is going to keep her warm no matter what.
You've heard it here first, guys. Solaria is autistic.
That's what I'm getting from this. I mean, yes, I'm getting that read, and maybe I'm biased, and maybe I'm projecting. But I think I have to give this one a 5 also, because she looks more comfortable than any of the others that I've seen so far. Like, if she fell asleep in this, I don't think she'd be mad about it. You know what I mean?
She would fall asleep in it, and she's like the most ready to perform straight away.
Yes, absolutely. And she's clearly bringing the magic with her to that performance.
I feel like I might have just like picked a selection that just have too high of a power level. I feel like that's where I've gone wrong here. I should have thrown some rejects into the pile.
Well, no, but you know, I mean, I think too, as people have shared the avatars with me for even just the Natalie voice bank, I don't see any of them, you know, whatever amount of time was spent on them. I love that there's a whole stick figure segment of the community as well. And I love that they feel that freedom, that they don't think that it has to be this very humanoid, you know, exact science, that it can be any kind of representation. They could make it an alien or a reptile. You know, they could make it like the Doctor Who character that's like half snake or something, and that'd be cool too. It could be anything.
I would be very down for like a Doctor Who Slitheen, but it's also, that's just one of the Natalie avatars.
That would be brilliant. If anybody makes that, I will absolutely add it to my Twitter banner with all the others. I'm still adding.
100%.
I love that stuff. Plus, I'm a Ren Fair girl anyway, so, throw a cape on me, throw some Renaissance wear on me, anything old-timey, I'm so in.
So, contestant number 5 is actually, like, a very left-field choice in terms of, like, picking, like, iconic vocalists, but she's just a personal favorite of mine. So this right here is Sangchong, a standard Chinese SynthV bank that was made prior to the debut of SynthV AI. Sangchong was one of many singers to receive a prototype bank referred to as SynthV Plus, which basically experimented with creating AI banks by training them on the output of a standard bank, rather than on the voice provider themselves. It never got a commercial release, and I'm so sad about it, but you know what? Sometimes love ends in heartbreak, so what can you do?
I love that this has, like, it's giving me, like, mermaid and koi vibes, or, like, emerald koi vibes. I love the green. I love the blue hair. I've had blue hair like that myself a number of times. The see-through dress reminds me of something I wore to a Grammy event last year, which I have to tell you, when you're wearing a dress like that, what you wear underneath is so vital. But they did a really beautiful job here. I really like that gold detail on the shoe or tights. I think it's shoe. And the butterfly wings coming off of that. That seems so cool. So it seems like there's like fish and mermaid, but also butterfly vibes going on here. Gosh, I mean, and what a beautiful face too. It's all just really gorgeous work. I think I have to give this a 5 too. Like, there's no mistake here. It looks like she'd be having a lot of fun, and she would not be too hot under the stage lights.
Queen Sangchong getting some recognition after all this time. Love that for her.
Finally! Yes.
Finally! So, contestant number 6 is where we're going to get somewhat subversive in terms of, like, the signatures that you've seen so far in designs. This is Flower, a feminine voice bank known for having a very boyish vocal tone and an androgynous character design. She's a big fan favorite, and this is her sporting her V4 redesign from 2015.
Nice. I like it. I like the gloves. I definitely had some of those looks growing up. Again, with the buckle, I feel like there's a lot of kink influence going on here, which is great and fun, but hard to sing with. But I love that little swath of hair too that's like dark and almost the reverse highlight. That's kind of great. I love the shorts. Like, you don't often see shorts with like a peplum sort of jacket like that. That's so original. Also love the boots, that they are like feminine but androgynous at the same time. And I really do like the subversive vibe of this. Like, it sort of says soft boy, BOI to it, you know? Gosh, I think I have to give this a 5 too. Like, there is no problem here. I mean, even with the collar, because it really fits the sort of like goth emo punk vibe of this. And hopefully they just, unbuckle it enough that it doesn't interfere with singing.
Also, at risk of being shot down by the Vocalsynth fandom, Flower does sing like she has a collar on, but that's just my opinion. That's just my opinion.
Okay, well that's fair then. Well, that makes me feel better about giving her a 5 when I gave the other.
And I say that as someone who likes Flower.
It's interesting that they gave her such a feminine name when she has such an androgynous vibe to her. Like, I could almost see her being called something more like Sam, Brilliant.
We've been getting some wonderful ratings so far. So, who would you say is your personal favorite in this selection then?
Oh, I think it would either be Solaria or the sort of mermaid butterfly gal. I forget her name. I think probably one of those two, and it might be a bit of a tie. Like, I might be, on the days that I'm feeling a little bit more loud and vivacious, I might be Solaria, and on the days that I want to be a little quieter and hide, even though the outfit is transparent, I think I would lean the other way. Yes.
Well, it looks like we have a tie. Vote now on your phones, audience. So contestant number 7 is going to be a little bit of a lightning round to end off this intermission, because she is such a diva that she's had a whole collection of designs over the years, and your job is to give her due judgment.
Uh-oh.
We're going to be looking at all 7 major designs of Hatsune Miku, the popular Japanese Vocaloid, and you will need to rate each design in chronological order. And with each one, I need you to tell me if the succeeding design was a glow up or if it's a glow down from the previous one.
Okay, very good.
Okay. MIKU lightning round, let's go. So starting off, we have MIKU's original Vocaloid 2 design from 2007.
I'm already loving the boots that are thigh highs and lacing up, loving the blue hair, which I've had before. I kind of like that the ponytail holders are almost like cat ears, the way that they're so angular. I don't know if that's quite intentional, but perhaps. And the hair is obviously such a standout. It also sort of has this Brit boarding school vibe, or not even boarding school, but just like the Brit uniform, school uniform vibe to it because of the skirt and the tie. So I mean, this is pretty classic, but still full of a lot of personality. I think I have to give it a 5.
That's perfect, a 5 for MIKU V2, just as God intended. Next up, we have Hatsune Miku Append. So this was an expansion pack of sorts for the original V2 bank, and it launched in 2010 that came with a bunch of new expressions for the voice for people to use. The original Miku V2 was just one bank, but Miku Append brought on sweet vocals, dark, solid, so that Miku could cover more genres and moods, and this was the redesign that expansion came with.
What year was this, do you recall?
2010.
Like 2000?
So this was
2000.
3 years later.
Really? Because for some reason, this is giving me a few different vibes. One of them is, I can't remember the name of the song, but I think it was sometime between like 2003 and 2005, there was this big move into music videos that looked like they were shot underwater. There was some sort of new CGI effect, and Evanescence used that in one of their videos. I can't remember which one. Going Under, probably. So it has that vibe going on for it, and it's like very bandaged looking. She has sort of like that ankle cuff that makes it look like she's on probation or something. And it does also have a little bit of a Final Fantasy X vibe to it for me. It's not bad, but oddly enough, I think I preferred the earlier one. So I think this is a glow down for me. It's still really beautiful. Like I think I would give it a 4. It just feels like they've taken away some of her freedom.
So after that, Miku had her English voice bank debut in 2013 with Miku V3 English, and in turn received a more unique design to appeal to Western audiences and more modern music genres.
Okay, this is giving me like X-Men Jean vibes, like Rise of the Phoenix a bit. They've really made her jaw much more angular here, which has aged her up a good bit. Like those last couple of drawings felt like she was 15 to 20, and here she looks like she's 25 and up. I do like the hair. The hair is really gorgeous. It has a read of a lot of the popular hair colors that we're seeing now, that vivid color, layered, multicolor look. You love the boots, always gonna love the boots, always here for the boots. Again, I sort of wonder about the stuff so close to the neck. That dress looks like it's armor for dancing. It has like a chest plate kind of vibe to it. But she's also kind of made to look like a cheerleader. So I don't know, I feel like conflicted here because it is beautiful, no doubt. But it also kind of reminds me of like what people thought we would dress like in the aughts before we got there. Like this is kind of what in the 90s they thought.
Back to the Future, we're going to the year 2015.
Yes, exactly. I get why they wanted to make it more palatable for Western audiences, but I think they made it a little too neutral when they did that. I can't say it's a glow up, but I can't quite say it's a glow down either. It's still really beautiful. I think if they had started here and you didn't have those prior versions, it would be so different. But something about this feels a little bit like erasure, and not just because of the cultural displacement that was intentional, as you say. But it feels like they were subtracting from her. So I think I have to say glow down. And a star rating. Let's go with, let's say 4, because I'm still kind of confused about that breastplating. What battles she is fighting as a songstress. I mean, it happens.
She's going to fight Solaria. They're going to have a dance battle, and they're going to.
Yes.
They've got their battle armor at the ready.
Yes.
So after all that branching out, all that weirdness, the original Miku Bank was given an upgrade for Vocaloid 3 later in 2013, and with it, a redesign in the form of Hatsune Miku V3.
Nice. Now see, this is back to the Hatsune that I have come to know in my my small exposure. Still loving the boots. Those boots are ready for the desert. They're serious, but they're also ready for like Iron Man sort of propelling if they wanted to, it seems like. I love that her long hair is back in its more original form. Feels like we're returning to who she was. She's returning to her roots. She's still got that school uniform look going on, but she looks way more comfortable here. So I think this is definitely glow up. I love that glove and what looks like it has some controls on it as well if she wants them. So I think 4.5. We're not like quite back up to full steam, but we're definitely getting back to who she really is.
As we said, she got her upgrade to Vocaloid 3, and Hatsune Miku V3 was born. And so when it came to upgrading her for Vocaloid 4 in 2016, they spun the redesign wheel again with Hatsune Miku V4X.
And this one, of all of them, this one feels like the most video gamey to me, I think. Like, it definitely looks like a character that you're going to be playing with full 360 rotation available to you. Thinned out her hair more and almost made it look more like it's a special effect around her instead of her hair, which is kind of interesting. But still loving the boots, still loving that sort of aqua vibe. I think it's still glow up. She's being truer to who she is. They do seem to sort of aged her down here, but I'm okay with it. I think I would leave her at a 4.5 here.
And so this was when they started branching out again. This time, in 2017, it was Miku's debut as a Chinese voice bank. And the redesign was as such. This is Hatsune Miku V4 Chinese.
Oh, I like what they've done with the hair bands here. That's cool. They've leaned into the goth vibe a little bit more here, even though it's still black and the coloring is still the same. Still liking the boots, though this looks a little more uncomfortable. And again, that neck part is just so tight, which I know when you have like the necktie, you're kind of going to lean into. But I think this is a glow down for her. It's kind of amplifying the wrong features in my mind. I mean, at least the face still looks like her. It doesn't look like it's so westernized. It looks less comfortable for some reason. So I'll leave her at a 4.5, but I think it is a glow down.
And then that leaves us with Miku's latest design that is currently available right now. To top it all off, as we moved into the 2020s, Vocaloid kind of fell in its overall market share. Companies were experimenting with new synthesizers like Chevio and SynthesizerV, and Miku's parent company decided that they wanted to make their own engine exclusively for her with blackjack and hookers. And as you'd probably expect, this came with a new design. Are you ready for the new design, Natalie?
Show me the latest.
This is Hatsune Miku NT, Miku's design for the 2020s.
I don't mind it. I like the see-through nature of her sleeves. That's timely. They've given her a little bit of the same vibe at the top of the boots. That's cool. The hair is back to who she was, who she is. They've kept that technology. I like that the technology on the sleeve, at least I think that's buttons, is on a transparent sleeve. That sort of shows some technological development too. The collar is looking a little more comfortable. It's also a little more feminine, which I think is awesome. Like it's still got some androgyny to it if you want it, but it's overall looking a little bit more classic for her, which is cool. And it's true to who she is. So I think this is a glow up. I think they're keeping all the important elements. The coloring is still really good. Her face still looks really friendly. She does look like she's no longer 10 or under here. So I think they've like had a little bit more, like, for lack of a better term, age accuracy, given how long she's been around. Yeah, I think this is a glow up, and I'm going to put this one at 5.
Okay, wonderful. So which would you say is your absolute favorite on this list then?
Oh gosh, let's see. I think either the very first, which does lean a little bit like BOI, you know. I'm always going to appreciate that androgyny, being part of the LGBT fam myself. But with the latest design as a close second, because it does look a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more doable and leans into the new arena.
So now I think it just leaves the question of, say that you are the parent and Natalie is your daughter. Which one are you allowing her to take to prom?
Oh, let's see.
This is definitely not me fueling shipping wars, because we have our fair share of shipping.
Wars between voices. Ah, nice. I think I would lean into either Solaria or what was the name of the character with the shorts who has this sort of purple stripe? Flower, right. Yeah, I think Solaria or Flower, which, I mean, is totally on brand for me, because when it comes to women, I definitely lean more mask, for sure.
Or, polycule.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
So that was our little intermission. I thought it would kind of like give you that fun bit of like design exposure, but we could have fun doing it.
No, I love that. I've definitely been wanting to get more familiar with all of those, and so I can start recognizing the faces of some of them the more I see them as well.
Going back to kind of like your correspondence with Dreamtonics and the talks for the Natalie project, I think it would be kind of like a fun point to kind of get the backstory across of like how the initial pitch came about. So like if it was a closed call where Dreamtonics reached out to you, or if there was any like preliminary processes of any kind. So how did Natalie come to be on SynthV?
So it was... That first contact was made through my composer friend, Mike, who just reached out and said they were looking for vocalists. And there wasn't really an audition or anything. He did say that before he put me in touch with them, he had already given them some of my music in some fashion. I have no idea what link of mine he might have given, if it was just my Spotify profile or Apple Music or something like that. I imagine it was some piece of my catalog, perhaps some of the songs that he had written. I worked on his song Santa Monica and his song Light Inside. Light Inside was used for a documentary soundtrack. I think it might have been the end title song for Touché, about a blind fencer. So those were very emotive songs. They were both ballads. They were both piano ballads. So if Dreamtonics at that time had been looking for somebody with a bit of a soulful sound, I imagine whatever he put on their radar probably fit that bill.
This is how you find out that he sent the next Jason Joseph.
You know what? I wouldn't put it past him. There is no possibility.
Kanru just looking at this and just being like, yes, that is the voice talent that I am looking for.
Or that playing of me from when I was 14. He's like, yes. That, whatever she sounds like now, that's definitely it.
Kanru, the CEO of Dreamtonics, just looking at all of the most obscure parts of your portfolio and just being like, perfection. Get her on the microphone now.
Oh my gosh. Well, and I have to imagine that, whatever was sent by Mike or eventually me, once he put me on the radar and I began those discussions with them, must have been like a pretty wide gamut of things. Like it must have been a sampling of a few different sounds. And I think that if I put myself in Dreamtonics' shoes, I have to imagine that the reason that I caught their interest was because they saw I did a spectrum of things, and I did a wide variety of things that might appeal to their user base at that time. So yeah, I didn't audition for them in any way. I didn't send them any samples. Mike had already done that. Once he put me in touch with them and we began our conversations, I probably did go, here's my website or something very general like that, whatever profiles I had at the time. But because it was also during COVID, I don't think I would have gone out of my way to record a sample for them or anything like that, because everybody was trying to limit their contact and limit how much they went out of the house. So whatever I did send them, it must have been stuff that already existed. But they responded very warmly too. I could see they seemed, every time we met, we would spend at least the first 30 to 60 minutes just talking about life and what was going on in the world, all three of us. So I think there was also a mindset there that even though we were talking about my voice and the quality of my voice and my performance, they did seem to have an interest in me as a person as well, and kind of what my philosophy was or how I was approaching the work that I was doing. And they seemed to be comfortable with who I was in the music space. And that made me feel like, that this was going to be a project that was as encompassing as it could be for what it was, And I was really pleased to see too that it didn't take quite as much effort or work as I thought it might, especially because they were able to use those past songs that I had already created and released for my albums. So yeah, it was really just that introduction and that sweet sauce of them saying, we're looking for a vocalist that has some of these qualities. We hear that in your existing catalog, and we wonder if you're willing, here's kind of what it entails. And then just agreeing to those terms and signing on with them. So it is kind of wild in retrospect that it wasn't like this American Idol style audition where I had to prove myself worthy. That by the time we were even introduced, they were already They were just looking for a yes or no from me. They had already been introduced to my vibe. So that was definitely helpful too, that I didn't have to prove to myself to them in any way, that my work had kind of already spoken for itself.
And just to be clear, you spoke with Kanro personally during the process, and he was very hands-on over the course of these proceedings, correct?
Yeah, he was in, I think, pretty much every meeting, unless, something about time difference precluded it. But usually we were meeting in the morning or afternoon my time, or maybe even like 5 o'clock my time, so that a counterpart in Boston could be there at like 8 o'clock their time, and then Kanru could join us at his early morning where he was. But we were always discussing, what I had sent them, if they needed any changes in the files, what else they were looking for. I gave them lyric sheets for all the songs too, so they could see all the words that were involved there. Yeah, it was, there are some ways in which it was very detailed. As you know personally from our private conversations, I'm very much a spreadsheet person. And, even when Robert and I did our interview recently, he was talking about the biggest thing for him was that this really called upon all his skills of organization, because to organize those vocal files and deliver them the way that Dreamtonics wanted, he really had to be quite detail oriented, which he naturally is, but he just leaned into that. And I think the same is true on my side too. Like, I just had spreadsheet tab after spreadsheet tab in Excel of what songs I was working on, what stage they were in, what we were going to work on today and today's session. And I think I even shared with you a glimpse into some of those spreadsheets where each tab was a different work day in the studio of what I had accomplished that day or what I was trying to accomplish. And it was definitely some of the most detailed work that I had done. But I think it was helpful that I already kind of had that mindset when I was working on my own projects, when I was working on my album, curating the track list, curating the order, curating who I collaborated with on each one of those things. So I was already used to all these moving parts and having to make sure that I hit a deadline a particular time and in a particular way. So I'm grateful that I had that background before I got pulled into this project.
I think it's just good knowing that, like, even if it's an independent project or a commercial project, it's not the production process of a Vsynth voice bank without at least one extremely extensive spreadsheet involved.
Oh, for sure. And I'm really grateful for that. Like, I think it would have been a lot if I had been relying entirely on them telling me what needs to come next, instead of my taking that onus upon myself to organize everything as much as I could on my side. And, alongside Robert as well, he and I are very like-minded in that way. We're both very left and right brained simultaneously. So you bring all the creativity and all the dynamic, but also all of this like engineering, coding, spreadsheet kind of mentality to it, so that we unify that and make sure that all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed. He was really an impeccable team member to work with for this process. And I think it would have been so much harder if I was doing it alone, to hear that any of the voice bank people, the other voice providers, might have worked alone, even with the guidance of Dreamtonics, maybe in session with them. I can't imagine how that would have been perhaps more difficult or just taken more energy than my being able to lean into that rapport that I already had with my producer, Robert Ibach, to just go through every bit of that and make sure that we were maintaining that consistency across all the recordings too.
All of the other like additional parties that kind of worked with you to make the bank what it is outside of Dreamtonics, like the composer that kind of got you on Dreamtonics' radar, the producer that worked with you, did they anticipate any of this kind of social media reaction, or was it just as much of a surprise for them as it was for you?
No, it was absolutely just as much of a surprise for them. When I put on Robert's radar just in the last few weeks how it had blown up, he said, I always wondered what had happened with that project, but he had no idea either. And same with Mike, Michael Shapiro, when the composer who introduced me to Dreamtonics, saw that it was blowing up and went to visit my Twitter feed. He was particularly taken with, somebody in the community asking me if I, human Natalie, would consider covering my AI voice bank self. And he said to me in a text message, he said, can you imagine trying to explain this conversation to yourself 20 years ago? That somebody would ask you 20 years later if you, human Natalie, were willing to cover a replica of yourself in a digital AI sphere, you know, and that you would have an answer to that question, you know?
I'm now just having, like, the thought in my mind of, like, if you have to make an account for a forum or something, it only makes sense that your username should be Human Natalie.
Oh my gosh, yes, that would be brilliant. I have all the weirdest handles that are always some amalgamation of my handles that came before, but Human Natalie would be a pretty great one. If I join the Discord, I shall try to create a separate username for that. That is Human Natalie. That would be kind of brilliant.
Overall, this has been all about new experiences and new perspectives on how we create and engage with works. And with that in mind, you've recently had the opportunity to try out SynthV for yourself because you hadn't had it in front of you until now.
That's right. Just in the last week or so, I was able to download myself, install myself, thanks to you. And it has been a wild experience to hit play, to hit that space bar, and to hear my voice render an andante in Japanese, you know, in a language that I do not currently speak. It is wild just to see all those settings and see how I could adjust my voice or play with my voice. And the funny thing is, and you know, you and I talked a little bit about this privately, is that it is similar in some ways to what I do as a human when I'm in the studio or as I prep, you know, and we mentioned that even a bit in this interview. I do prepare some of those dynamics in advance of when I go into the studio, and we do some of that After Effects in post as well. Like, even when I'm just speaking and not even singing, a lot of my radio days in my DAW in Adobe Audition, I edited my breaths a lot because we get these radio commercial scripts that are supposed to be 30 seconds exactly, but they give us 35 seconds of verbiage, and they don't know. You know, most of the time the companies that are writing that stuff, they don't read through it enough, or they're reading through it at a pace that's not articulate enough, you know. So when they give it to me and I have to make it understandable for the masses, I need to slow it down a little bit. But in order to get it back down to that 30 seconds, I have to cut my breaths in half. So I've become an expert at going in and enlarging that part of the sound wave and cutting my breath in half or eliminating it entirely. That still makes everything that's being said and performed feel human and natural. So it makes perfect sense to me now that I'm in the SynthV software and I'm seeing how people alter everything, that there is a breath mode, that it can be done automatically, or you can go in there manually and adjust that, because I've done that even in my speaking part, certainly in my singing. Robert and I frequently have those conversations. I'm surprised we didn't touch on it in our interview, especially when we're in the mastering phase and we're in the final home stretch of getting something ready to release. We'll go through, and some of those breaths, especially right before I belt or something where I'm just really pulling into my diaphragm, it sounds so loud on such a quiet song or in a quiet moment of a song that we have to really pull down the natural volume on it, or eliminate it, or fade it up, or do, you know, any number of things to make that breath not so distracting. And I will do passes listening through my music with that one quality in mind. Is there anything here that when I listen in my car, when I listen on my headphones, when I listen on my laptop, or listen in any setting, that jumps out at me like it's out of place, or it's competing with the other stuff and isn't blending in? And we try to address that. So it's really beautiful to see that even in the SynthesizerV software, where you're dealing purely with vocals, nothing else, that you can still go in there and, you know, dice it or fade it up or put those envelopes on it that will give it those qualities that we are also trying to create in the studio with my human voice. It makes so much sense that so many of those same tactics and strategies and approaches and methods are being used on this synthesizer version of me as well.
I just want to share the fun anecdote that came from this, which was that the way in which you were able to access SynthesizerV and access your voice was from me lending you my copy. And how it actually came about was that while we were chatting with each other privately, I was basically just like, oh, by the way, considering how unaware of all of this you've been, I assume you don't have the software yourself. I haven't actually purchased Natalie, but I've been meaning to do so. So I was just wondering, if I do so, if you'd like to borrow my copy. And she immediately sends a voice note back to me, just being like, you mean to tell me you haven't purchased me? You mean to tell me?
But totally joking, just totally giving joking. You a hard time. Yeah.
But it's also kind of as a result of that it's like you've had other voices to play with in turn. You've not only had Natalie, but you've also been able to get Mai, because Mai is free to access if you have the Pro Editor. But it was also in that I let you try my copies of Saki, of Kevin, and of Asterion. And so it will be definitely interesting to kind of see you not just experiment with making demos of your own voice when your actual voice is not feeling up to it, but also kind of being able to experiment with other people's vocal qualities for maybe some kind of ensemble demo of some kind.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because I do love doing a cappella work so much, as you know, even in my own catalog. And growing up performing with my mom and my older sister, you know, we were always trying to figure out, okay, well, who takes the baritone part on this? Who takes the descant, you know, mezzo or coloratura, you know, soprano part on this? We were always trying to find a way to use our trio of voices. And my mom, because she was the oldest among us, would often take that lower range. And my sister was often singing melodies, so she often had like an alto or sort of mid-range, and I was often having to fit in around her. And I think it's funny now, even now, like when I sing as a human and I'm harmonizing, especially in my TikTok videos where you hear me making it up on the fly while I'm driving and my attention is really, as it should be, on the road in front of me. You hear me sort of deciding in the moment, like, do I go up here or do I go down, or do I sing in unison with? So I can see myself having a lot of that same fun in the software as I get more familiar with it, and deciding, you know, does Mai take the lead on this and I'm the lower vocal? Do I put Asterion in very low? Do I put Kevin in to do a duet with her? I think I'm going to have a lot of fun experimenting with that, especially because I do also write some musical style songs that are meant to be addedly storytelling and are meant to have that vibe that they're in a soundtrack or an overall musical. But when I have written them out of necessity, I've been voicing all the parts myself, which is fine. But it can feel a little lackluster when you know you could be giving it more color by putting in those additional voices. My very first time singing for a wedding professionally, by the way, I was asked to take a song as a duet between two people and sing it as one individual. Yeah. And it was not a song that was really built for that. It was called Don't Know Much by Aaron Neville and Linda Ronstadt. And it's a dialogue between the two of them. And there are parts where he says, like, look at this man so blessed with inspiration. And I had to kind of make the call and talk to the bride about it. Like, do you want me to change the gender? Do you want me to not pretend that I'm a man and like do like this side of my face is a guy and this, you know, that sort of. But it was tough because even though I think Aaron Neville has a pretty high voice and is thought of as a tenor, that's almost an alto, Linda Ronstadt, on the other hand, has a very deep and low, rich voice. They do sort of meet in the middle, so like note-wise, it was easy enough for me to do it as a solo, but it was hard for me to kind of play both of those roles fairly with equity and deliver it as a solo for a wedding in this very formal setting, you know? So I think I definitely learned something from that experience about like when it's the right time to use one voice and when you should just let it breathe and have more than one voice. And I look forward to playing with that in SynthV.
I think it's like straight away your experience with the software has already been able to capture kind of like one of the many appeals that comes from using a vocal synth, which is that having so many voice banks to choose from, there are those characteristics that people do like to like pick from so that they can incorporate it into their own works. Like the amount of male and otherwise assigned male at birth producers that we have, where they predominantly make music with feminine voice banks, and it's because they grew up on like all that pop and R&B, and they're still enjoying genres like K-pop to this day. And I feel like that's also something worth appreciating, how it's like it's another medium of which to create more music that's more akin to what we like.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that there's also that wide breadth of feeling like you can't use it for so many things, but also that niche of saying, but also this voice is most gifted. It seems to be best suited or well suited for this collection of music. I think there are benefits to both sides of that. And I think it's cool too that there is at least that one bank that's sort of seen as non-binary, that doesn't lean either way, that could go either way. So that you have that dichotomy, but also that unification and that full paint palette of being able to go any direction you want to. Because there are also many songs that don't strictly need a gender involved, you know? I love the bending songs too, where like we do know that originally Every Breath You Take was sung by a guy, but that doesn't mean that every woman who sings it has to change, you know, any of the lyrics to reflect that they're a woman. Like we can keep the original lyrics or we can change them either way. I think it's fun to play with and experiment, and I'm glad that there's that gender button as well. That gender,
the gender slider. Oh, we love that. We love the gender slider, and it's like. And there is that kind of like gender ambiguity that's at play. Like we have androgynous mascots, like you've seen with Flower. We have canonically non-binary vocalists like Saros, who was produced by Eclipse Sounds. But we even have things like, to an extent, like the alphabet vocalists by Dreamtonics, where because there's no mascot, we have the absolute free reign to interpret the vocalist as who we want to be. And I would not be surprised if there was a producer somewhere who decided that they wanted to use the Natalie voice bank, and through either putting it in octaves that are lower than what you're able to typically sing, or by just playing around with the gender parameter, that they're able to use Natalie in a work in which the character behind the voice is a masculine vocalist.
I like it. You could call it Nathan. You can call it whatever you know.
Could call it Nathan.
You know, like, I mean, gosh, I've had so many iterations of my own name through the years. People call me Natalia and Natasha and Talia, everything under the sun. NNG, you know, N squared.
Have I ever told you the name that my mother would have given me if I was AFAB?
No. What is it?
Martha.
What? Oh, well, I'm quite glad then that you were AMAB.
Love you, Mum.
You know, I mean, but I think people would have called you Mars for short if that was the case. You know.
Okay, no, that would have fucked. That would have fucked. If I was AFAB and then I still decided that I was non-binary, I probably would have changed my name to Mars.
That's a pretty great name, right?
Isn't it? Isn't it? Like, I mean,
yeah.
I spent, like, the first 20 years of my life being a Joe, but then I wanted to change it to Joey because Joey is more androgynous. Like, that's the fun thing about fluidity.
Yes, gosh. I'm always telling people, it is not only autism that is a spectrum, you know? Everything in life it's not all black and white. It's not all, you know, 1 to 3 colors. And it's so frustrating to me when everybody tries to make labels that only fit 2 kinds of things. You know, and they so rarely recognize 3rd and 4th and 5th and 101st options.
Happy Pride Month, by the way. It only just crossed my mind that we decide to do this at the start of June.
Brilliant. Happy Pride. Love it. Yes.
So moving on. This one's for fun. You don't need to disclose anything at all like names if you don't want to. You can be as mysterious as you like with this answer. But do you personally know any other voice providers who have done voice work for other Vsynth voice banks, be they SynthV or otherwise?
I have discovered an identity of one and have said hello. I have sent a message that was replied to, and have offered to collaborate in human form with this other human. So we shall see if that eventually happens. My hope is that over time they will be open to it. And I think as they see how warmly I've been invited into the community myself, that could open that door, perhaps. I definitely don't want to make them feel pressured to say yes to that. But yes, I do know another entity who I would personally love to sing with, and I think that we could do beautiful duets from what I have heard.
We're just putting a little pin in that one. A little ominous pin.
Indeed.
Speaking as someone who recorded a virtual singer before, I think one of the more shocking aspects when you hear the voice for yourself is when it sings things that you have no archive or ability of. So for example, we mentioned it ages and ages ago, that one of Natalie's most iconic uses was in the SynthV commercial where a model sings in front of a microphone, but the audio is just a Natalie render. That ad is really entertaining for me for a lot of reasons, the latest one being that I believe you said on your Twitter that it came as a surprise to yourself because you've never recorded yourself singing Amazing Grace, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly at funerals or weddings I have sung it in human form before, but I don't recall it ever being recorded. So, straight away when a fellow producer of mine up in Seattle, Amit Amran, when he sent me that video on Instagram when SynthesizerV first released it and said, "Is this you?" He immediately recognized my voice, even though he'd only heard me sing, I think, on a couple of songs by that point. He'd only worked with me on a couple of songs in studio, and they were scratch tracks, so they weren't even my fullest potential. But then, when I received that message, I was standing in the living room with my partner and I hit play on it. And within seconds, he was like, "Babe, that's you." And those first few notes, I didn't hear it. To me, it didn't sound familiar enough. But the longer I played it, I was like, okay, yeah, I can hear it. But then my immediate thought was exactly as you say, I, human Natalie, did not record that song. I don't think I have recorded like His Eye is on the Sparrow with beautiful harmonies and stuff, but just never that one particular song. So I knew this could not have been pulled from an actual recording of mine. It had to be something they entirely rendered with synth. So it was kind of wild, not gonna lie. Like, and immediately there was that sense of, well, this cat is out of the bag. They must have completed the programming now. So it's out there. I looked back on when that message was sent to me. That was December of 2022. Yeah. So, and I think I remember at that time I almost commented on that video or almost said something, but I was like, well, it's just been released. Give it some time. Like I didn't say anything. I mean, and it's not that I didn't publicly acknowledge my partnership with the companies behind this on my social media. I did at that time, back when I was working on it before it was released or around the time it was about to release. But I will absolutely own that once it did release, life was just so busy. I was moving, I was traveling, I had so much going on in my personal life that I did not make a lot of noise about it. And to be honest, I think with absolutely no slight meant at all to the community, and I don't think anybody in the community will hear one, but I didn't know just how public, like, I mean, I knew it was being released publicly, but I didn't know how much of a niche community this was. Like, I love Adobe Audition, and there are a number of us that use that software, but it is actually one of the less popular DAWs out there, like, when I bump into somebody else who uses Adobe Audition, I'm like, oh, a kindred spirit, how rare you are. Because most people use, Pro Tools and Cakewalk and Reason and Digital Performer and so many others. Like, there's a very particular subset of us that usually come from very particular backgrounds who have Adobe Audition as our DAW of preference and primary default DAW. So I think some part of me thought this software might be the same, that yes, there might be a wide swath of people who use it in a variety of places, but they might be a little bit disjointed, or they might be sort of random.
It's kind of like it's not really a logical conclusion that you would make because you don't look at Adobe Audition and think, oh, there should be an Adobe Audition fandom.
Right. Exactly. I don't think I ever saw coming that there would be a fandom with a fan wiki that they update the same day that my identity is revealed. I don't think that was ever on my radar or my bingo card that would be a possibility.
Honestly, it was at like lightning speed that I went onto the Natalie page, and it's just the page is just decked out with edits of just like, and also it was voiced by Natalie Nicole Gilbert, and I was just like, y'all work fast.
Truly fast. And I think that was one of my first indicators of just how avid this fandom is and how passionate they are, that they wanted to curate that information for people right away. And I won't lie, like, that is part of why I emailed Kenru right away. First of all, to make sure that, I had not said more than I was supposed to already, but also to kind of, give him that chance to be vocal himself. And so when he did, I felt good about screenshotting that and sharing that with the community so they could see, like, Kenru's on board with this. We're okay, guys. You didn't get me in any trouble. We're good.
It's kind of giving like a house party vibe of just like you come back through and you're just like, it's all right, guys. Kanru says it's okay.
Well, I didn't expect Kanru to like reply and shut it down and go, well, nope, you've got to pretend, you've got to nix that. But I wasn't sure, since so much time had gone by, if there was now some advantage to my not have been so vocal, so to speak, about it. For instance, I know some people had asked me, on Twitter, is it odd to you that it's been black coded? And clearly with the release of that video with a black actress singing Amazing Grace in my stead with my voice bank, I think some people had that question, like, was it a thought from the beginning that this voice bank would be pitched that way? And that was never communicated to me. I was never told, like, in every way that you can, we need you to pretend or whatever, play into this idea, or not reveal yourself so that people can believe this. There was never any of that, But I do think that what did come into play, and from what I've heard in the community, this is quite common, that there is a respect for the ambiguity or the unknown and the anonymity of any voice provider who wishes to remain anonymous. And in my case, it wasn't so much a wish or a hiding or like going out of my way to be anonymous. It was just that I didn't realize that there were so many people who were curious or wanted to know who that individual was. It was more just that I didn't know that there were people to tell who didn't already know. I think I had probably assumed that because Dreamtonics had named the bank after me, they had specifically asked for my permission to call it Natalie, that buried on some back page on their website would probably say at the bottom of the page near the trailer, voiced by Natalie Gilbert.
But not even that. I mean, it was actually when all of this news started to drop, I think one of the first tweets that I made about this news was just, so guys, I found out that we've discovered the voice provider of Natalie. Was it the she came out and said that she did it kind of reveal, or was it internet sleuths found all of her personal profiles?
And I think it was sort of both in the long run.
And then everyone replied saying it was a bit of both. It was a bit of both.
Absolutely. And I mean, I had no idea what waterfall I was starting when I replied to that one comment on YouTube and just took ownership. Like I referred to earlier, it's sort of what felt like a funeral where I walked into a room where everybody was discussing me and didn't know that I had joined the conversation, And I think that's part of why I treaded lightly, too, to be honest, is I think even in that moment, I kind of perceived that since all of these people have clearly been talking about me not knowing who I am, it might be a bit of a shock to them to discover who I am, even though I couldn't fully articulate in my mind why I felt like it might be a shock or but I think because it was clear that my voice bank had already become such an entity on its own, I didn't want to disrupt those conversations. Kind of like you were saying earlier, I was immediately aware that there might be a bit of that barrier of everybody who is saying all these lovely things clearly had no idea that I, the voice provider, would probably stumble on their remarks. And I want to respect that conversation was already going on before I came into the room as a human, even though I was already part of the discussion because it originated from my voice. So it's like a weird dichotomy. I mean, I've been on both sides of this equation. We all have, right? Because we are all fans of something, and I haunt Reddit boards wearing not my real name necessarily, discussing some of my favorite TV shows. And I absolutely write every single thing I post with an awareness that it is public. It is not password protected. It is not on a private server. That talent could pop by that Reddit at any time and see my remarks. And I try to write it in a way that they won't feel, defamed or derogatory or negativity, while still being, honest about, oh, I'm disappointed with the way that the story unfolded this season. I liked season 1 better. I think there's a balance for both. It's the same way that I'm not personally offended when somebody says they prefer the original Natalie, they don't like the update as well, But I think there is that awareness of other people being able to join the conversation and trying to keep that in mind. And I think I was pretty keenly and early aware as I saw those remarks that all of those people discussing the Natalie voice bank might never have believed that I would come along and see any of those remarks. And you and I talked early on too about, in our private conversations ahead of this interview, about how funny the timing is, because the reality is that I could have never realized, that this community existed and continued on my way, never revealing myself. Or I could have been more vocal at the beginning, and all of you could have known who I was the better part of 2 years ago. It could have gone any number of ways. But there is something kind of special and specific and fortuitous in the timing being what it is today, in ways that I think I can't even fully comprehend yet. But it does feel like this is the right time, that it's better than later.
I've said before, I'm not really an everything happens for a reason type person, but it does feel like the way in which all of this has transpired has happened in such a specifically right time frame for everyone involved, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's also something beautiful for me on the receiving end in meeting the community when they've already developed such a familiarity with my voice, and they've already taken a certain ownership of my voice bank in their own works. And I think, in a way, if I had to articulate it on their behalf to the best of my ability, that for them it feels like they have been collaborating with me for 1.5 years or 2 years, but suddenly now I've actually showed up, or maybe we've been collaborating remotely, but now I'm in the room with them in a different way, because they have been using me as their demo singer for a long stretch of time now, which is beautiful. And I'm happy to become aware of it and come alongside them now and see how they're doing it without interfering. Like, I want to be so respectful and treat that bond between them and my voice bank as sacred, and only be as involved with that as they wish me to be. If they want to continue creating sort of in a silo and not reporting to me what they made with my voice, that's perfectly fine. But there's also this really beautiful additional moment that's enabled now by this reveal, where they can now tweet those YouTube links at me or private message me about something, and I can, engage with them. Somebody this week was saying, I want to draw a new avatar for you. Would you mind giving me your feedback on it as I draw it? And that's lovely. Like, by no means would I feel like that's now required because you know who I am. But at the same time, I'm happy to engage in those conversations and be a part of it to whichever degree people want me to be.
Yeah, there is that kind of toad line again of where it's like, there is something nice about knowing that we want to go out of our way to be considerate of you. And then at the same time, you also have this acknowledgement of, like, I'm not technically the author of this story, in a way.
Exactly. Particularly in the new chapter that it's taken, and this deviating life that it's taken on, and in the hands of people who are creating new stories with a part of my entity, with a part of my DNA, It's really lovely to see, but I am totally aware, too, that, like, I don't technically have a say any longer in, like, exactly what shape that takes, as long as it's not really breaking terms of service or being done in some really awful derogatory way. But beyond that, people can make my voice bank sing very cheesy lyrics, or lyrics like I was writing when I was 5 about boyfriends and girlfriends falling in love, or it can be any number of things. But I think that's part of the beauty of it, that it can be things that I would never conjure up on my own. But that I've handed off as a tool, kind of passing the torch to somebody else for them to run with it whichever direction they want to.
Wonderful. So we've discussed before about the cross-lingual feature on SynthV, all of the additional language capabilities, and feature capabilities too, because as I told you, Natalie can rap as well. She can do rap. She can do more than just sing. But I think with cross-lingual synthesis, that just begs the question, can you sing in other languages? And are there any languages that you'd love yourself or Natalie to try singing one day?
I love the quotation mark, Natalie.
Non-human Natalie.
Natalie. I, of course, primarily speak in English, which is why the voice bank was kind of pitched that way. But I have sung a number of songs in French. I have sung along with a number of songs in Italian. Well, I technically recorded one Italian aria as well. I have recorded Latin for Piezu on my Christmas album. I have never, as human Natalie, yet sung in Cantonese or Japanese or Chinese or any of that. That would be brilliant. I would love to learn how. There are so many songs that are out there that I love the Italian version of Laura Fabian's Adagio. She has both an English version and an Italian version. I am good at singing the Italian version of The Prayer by Josh Groban and Charlotte Church, that version. But I have not had as much success singing along with the Laura Fabian version in Italian of Adagio, which uses Barber's Adagio, and I think that could be so fun. So if I could get the software to sing that for me, even to show me how it's done and break it down a little bit, I think that would be a lot of fun.
Even if it would be doing phoneme bending with an existing language to try and produce an Italian-like effect. Because it's like I said to you before of and again, some context for our listeners, that while we are in a ways restricted to the languages that the bank was supported in, we also engage in a process called phoneme bending, where we use the phonetics of the supported languages to make an entirely new result. So, such as how Japanese voice banks were very popular with Spanish users wanting to make Spanish vocals, because Japanese and Spanish are so phonetically similar to one another. So you get a lot of, for example, Hatsune Miku songs where she sings in Spanish even though she does not have a Spanish voice bank. So I feel in a way it would be interesting to kind of see if we were able to see a Natalie output that kind of phoneme bends to produce a whole new range of languages.
I would love to see Natalie sing in Hindi. I have
in Hindi.
I know that sounds funny, maybe, but I have such an affection for Bollywood music. I love listening to raga, and, Indian dance music, especially. It's just the quarter steps that they use in their music are so gorgeous and beautiful. The beats are really gorgeous. So I would love to see the Natalie voice bank have a capability to do some of that stuff that I, human Natalie, have not. I can sing along with Raghav, but I can't do some of the upper range stuff that some of those Hindi singers do presently.
I do need to take a sec to fanboy out with regards to languages, because it was in our DMs to each other that I mentioned that I grew up in Wales, and you were like, oh, Welsh is such a beautiful language, and I was punching the air. I was so happy. I was because barely anyone knows what Wales even is.
What? Yes, I think it's with an H. They don't think about the country for sure.
Well, that.
Well, I've been to London so many times. I studied there at the University of London and with the London School of Economics. And I was particularly inclined, my student visa, if every time that I left the UK, I was going to have to reprove my student visa at the border with my student visa. So to not get around that, but to just think about the constraints of that and what would make that easier, I thought, well, I'll do as much traveling within the UK while I'm studying here as I can. So when I saw that Cardiff was just a 2.5 hour train ride from Paddington Station.
Lovely city.
Love Cardiff.
Love
so
Cardiff
I went
so
over there.
Much.
I had a chance to record in one of your studios while I was there because a voiceover client needed something from me during that stretch of time while I was traveling that couldn't wait until I returned to the States. I've been to Cardiff now a few times. In fact, I think you and I talked about when I was realizing your heritage, that the cover shot for my winter album, my holiday album, Warm Winter, is snow in Cardiff. I think I've failed to send you the larger picture it's taken from, but it's a picture at the bay of just a bunch of snow that's packed down in front of a cafe there, kind of walking distance from Cardiff BBC. I love that whole area. I've been to Cardiff Castle. I've stayed also in Dublin over at Clontarf Castle. So I just kind of love all those areas around the EU, around the UK, but Wales especially just has a special place in my heart, and partly for the reasons you've said, that a lot of people don't know about it. It's sort of a hidden gem, and people, even though they're so close to it and it's such a quick train ride, they sort of fail to take the time to get over there, even though, it's cost-wise very effective. It's very affordable to travel there.
I mean, it's even something that I felt myself growing up, where it was so specifically, I grew up on one of the border towns where it was in Wales, but it was right on the border between Wales and England, and both of my parents, they're Southern England, that's why the accent is this way. So it was I lived in Wales for 20 years, and I grew up with the language and the culture, but I think I was at a part of the side of the country that was predominantly English people that didn't emphasize it enough. And so it was in a way, it felt even though of course I was a child and I didn't know better, it felt like I kind of contributed to a form of cultural erasure in some way, and that was something that I really wanted to get back on. And I think working with Vsynths is what kind of led to my confidence in singing. And it was in that I wanted to give some appreciation to the Welsh language by learning Welsh vocals, and to kind of give my audience an idea of like what I've been workshopping. Maybe even produce a Welsh Vsynth one day, but we'll have to see on that front.
Well, I would certainly love for you to take the Natalie voice bank, and even if it's with phonemes, to make it seem in Welsh.
I could see if I could phoneme bend it. I think it's like one sound that would be difficult because it would be missing from an English recording list is there's kind of like a hl sound that you make with your tongue, and then there's kind of like a h sound that you make with your throat. So that would be I would need to kind of like figure that out, but that would be definitely something that I would want to try. I was ultimately, I just wanted to, like, indulge about your time in the UK, because it really does sound like a second home for you. You've been dot to dot across the country, which sounds gorgeous, and I'd also like to mention to our listeners that you've watched your fair share of Doctor Who in your time. I basically just want to let the listeners know how cool you are. Funny Vsynth trivia is second on my priority list. First on the priority list is Natalie is really fucking cool.
You are brilliant. Well, I mean, and you share so many of those qualities. Like, I immediately found that kinship with you, because yeah, I do. I honestly, I think that there's so much British content, and from the UK as a whole, not speaking just of England, that is so much more meaningful than a lot of American content. I get very tired of watching American shows. They're so sensationalized. American music can be kind of regurgitated too. But, when I listen to the kind of folk music, or, like Celtic music, or like Mare Brennan or her sister Moira, and music that originates from all parts of the UK, there's some gorgeous, gorgeous music there. I remember actually having a bit of a beef, to be honest, with my radio promoter at one point, and I quickly fired him after this, to be honest.
Slay.
And I don't feel bad about it. I recorded a British holiday song for my holiday album, and he really wanted me to promote Grown Up Christmas List in the UK, and I was like, I could not roll my eyes more. I was like, first of all, everybody has recorded Grown Up Christmas List, and yes, I did put it on my album so that there's a familiar track title there for people that are just wondering, does this holiday album have a holiday classic on it? There it is. That one's for you. But there are so many versions of that song that have been done so well, people don't need a 50th version of it. I said, however, this other song from The Snowman, a very well-loved British TV presentation that has also aired in America, is huge in the UK. So I want to promote my version of Walking in the Air from that film. The original version was done by a boys' choir, so it was sung, by a kid boy. I come in with the female version. I always love to change the gender on things like that. But we had so much fun creating. Dana Bizignano did the piano arrangement on that. I think we even might have had real strings from Andrew Jocelyn on it. Robert Ibach produced it. It was such a beautiful piece. And in that, I think the kid is from Brighton in the animated feature, and there's not I think so. And there's not a single spoken word. It's all animated. The only thing where there's any language at all is this song that is sung by a boys' choir with this young boy lead. And it has all the minor chords. The lyrics are beautiful. So I wanted to promote that, and I backed it up with data about how popular that song is. So we wound up doing that. He buckled, and I said, look, I'm paying you to do a thing, and this is what I'm paying you to do. So promote this song, not the other one. And in the end, I was right. That song did very well and charted and got some radio airplay in the UK because I promoted a song that they already knew and that not too many other people had. So I love bringing attention to sort of like the lesser known hidden gems, the B-side songs. I have a video somewhere on my Instagram where I also talk about how stupid it is that the music industry at large sometimes looks down on covers, because covers is what keeps songbooks and nostalgia alive. And they make a tremendous amount of money on it, but also there's this assumption that artists like me who aren't household names, but are, also well-versed and have a lot of studio albums, that we do covers to get famous or to get, 15 minutes of fame for our version of Ed Sheeran's latest or Taylor Swift's latest. But those aren't the songs that I cover. I cover Snow on the Sahara by Angun, who is probably not an artist you've heard of, or right? And I forget what language she normally sings in. She sings in English, but she also sings in another language. Snow on the Sahara was originally in French, but it was trans-lyriced into English. So, like, I wanted to bring attention to that, and then all of the Angun fans found me. But I didn't do it for them to find me. I did it for my fans to find Angun and to drive them to the original. And I don't mind if people think the original is better than me. I just want to keep that song alive in the collective conscience. So I think there's a huge value to covers. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of love what they're doing in the vocal synth community too, because they're taking this opportunity to have the software forever memorialize some of these songs that are, that have staying power, sure. Like, Adele's catalog is going to live on for a very long time. But there are other songs from like Ella Fitzgerald that they've had. I think somebody had my voice bank do a cover of Dream a Little Dream of Me, or, some of those older jazz songs. And I love seeing people keep those alive. Ella's version will forever and always be one of the supreme, right up there at the top. But that doesn't mean that the rest of us shouldn't also still sing it to keep it alive and keep it in the forefront of people.
And I always say that, like, covers are just such a great medium to engage with, even if you have no prior music experience and no theory experience, because they kind of act as that playground for you to kind of learn music as you go, but also just apply that little personal touch. And it's like, of course, especially over in the English covers side of things, we do have a lot of covers that come out because a song is popular at the moment, and then that just comes about. I don't blame that personally, because sometimes you just find out a song through word of mouth and then you want to cover it. But at the same time, some of my all-time favorite cover artists in the Vsynth fandom are ones where they are just absolute freaks with their taste. Like, they'll just be like, okay, so guys, this new cover I'm doing is of an artist that nobody has heard of that released this song back in 2009.
I love that. See? And yeah, there are absolutely songs that I have covered where I thought I was covering the cover artist, and then I realized it was actually written by somebody else a much longer time ago.
It kind of goes into that, like, covering Ouroboros. It's very funny, because we do have... It's not necessarily that we as a community, we struggle with citation or, like, tracing things back to their origin point, but we do have a lot of songs where a cover becomes so popular and influential that is, for a lot of people, that is the original song to them.
Absolutely. I Will Always Love You will always first be ascribed in people's minds to Whitney Houston, even though it was originally written by Dolly Parton, which is such a funny, like,
See,
you wouldn't naturally...
I didn't even know Dolly wrote it. I did not even know Dolly wrote it.
Yeah, and it wasn't... I didn't know that for years, and then somebody pointed out to me, and I was like, really? And then I went back and heard the Dolly version, and I thought, okay, I can see that. Like, it does track, it does make sense, but you would not naturally think that Whitney Houston would pick up a song written by Dolly Parton, But at the same time, there is something really beautiful about when those covers transcend the genre like that, I love to take a song that was fast. One of the songs that we gave to SynthV that I haven't released publicly yet, but Dana, my collaborator, has been dying for me to finally release, that I will promise soon, Dana, is called Friday I'm in Love. And the original version is like decently peppy, but we slowed it down and turned it into this like dark melancholy ballad that would suit like a Grey's Anatomy, somebody is dying on the table sort of montage. Where like especially the last few notes are so emotive, like it gives me goosebumps every time. But the only reason I haven't released it is that I kept looking for the right album to tuck it on. It's like, well, it doesn't belong on the Christmas album, it doesn't belong on the dance album, it's not quite acoustic enough to fit on the recovery album. I kept waiting to have a album about love to fit it on. But I think this new album that we're releasing with other SynthV tracks that we had recorded will be the right fit for it. And I may release it as a single before that, so Dana can finally be pleased that I released it for him. Because we recorded that one. It's one of the oldest that we recorded. We might have recorded it in 2019. But it's been sitting around for a while. No fault of his. I think he might have even had a sample of it on his website for a while as a demo of his arranging work, because he did such a beautiful job on it. Because I think he did all the piano playing on that. But yeah, there's a number of songs like that, and I think you can give it a second life when you switch the gender of the vocalist, or when you give it a different speed or a different genre. I will never forget listening to Tori Amos's version of Teen Spirit by Nirvana, and I knew the lyrics, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was until she got to that chorus, and then I'm like, of course it's Teen Spirit. But it's so different that your brain can't quite lock onto it, and I think that's brilliant.
I do love the universal queer experience that is taking a song, covering it, and then going, I'm gonna change the gendered pronouns in the lyric so that it makes it gay.
I love that. Yes,
Love
like
that.
Sam Smith is it. Sam Smith rules on stuff like that. It makes perfect sense. And I like to do like I remember some of the early love songs that I did where I was taking a male, gendered song and making it for female, and trying to decide, do I leave it with those pronouns or not? And I vacillated sometimes depending on what my venue was and where I was singing for what audience, if I thought they could handle it without going off the deep end. But I think these days, pretty universally, you can do that, and people don't really bat an eye at it, no matter where you are.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's it's a case of like a little bit of room for everything, but I feel like there's not only value in kind of like providing gender ambiguity to lyricism, but I feel like there's also a value that comes from like amping up the gender expression, as it were. One example for me that comes to mind is that one of my all-time favorite artists is Cara Emerald, who is a Dutch electro swing singer. And one of my all-time favorite songs from her that I've listened to ever since I was a small child is Dr. Wanadu. And so it's like, in the lyricism of the song, there's not just, oh, she's a cis woman singing, she's singing about a man, there are he, him pronouns in the lyrics. But it's also just like, he asked me to step forward, so I got a breath and ran for endless observation in the hands of Superman. I like when they emphasize the gender expression of the subject of the lyricism, so that then that way you can't change the pronouns, you've got to commit to singing about a man. And I think that was a very informative and influential experience for me, for a song that I just loved singing along to even when I was in the closet.
I love that. And I think you're absolutely right that there are some songs where even if you tried, you can cover Peter Gabriel's Don't Give Up and switch it to a female voice, which they've done. But it would be harder to take like Candle in the Wind from Elton John about Norma Jean and, adjust some of that. But then I've also done, I did a cover of some song by Daniel Bedingfield where he says something about a Brad Pitt smile. And I've never found Brad Pitt that attractive. He seems kind of plain to me. So at the time when I performed it live, I swapped in the phrase "a Seth Green smile" because he was more in line with my like.
Oh, let's
nerdy
go.
love.
So so in a way, you changed the gender expression. You changed to a version of masculinity that is more you.
Totally, yeah. Like I wanted the lanky nerdy guy, so I swapped in that image, which suited me and felt more believable for me than pretending that I was into Brad Pitt, even though it's still a male. But the syllables still worked. Seth Green, Brad Pitt,
I think that is something that I wanted to kind of like take a sec to like explicitly illuminate, which is that we have been talking ad nauseum with regards to like our queer identities, our neurodivergent identities. And I remember when you were starting to respond to the community that it was so heartwarming for me to read that it was your pleasure at seeing the volume of not just queer but also furry members in our community, and how we have this huge pool of people from different marginalized communities, and I just hope that they all feel at home here. Of course, we have our discourse about making sure that people are adequately represented, that they're adequately treated, but nonetheless, all I sincerely hope in this community is that that everyone feels like it's a community that they can call home for their identity. And I just kind of wanted to say that it feels nice knowing that we have someone within the commercial industry who kind of represents those values, I feel.
Absolutely. And I mean, in all that I've done, even as I've taught the arts over time, I've always wanted to be a safe space and create that welcoming space for people to know that they can bring their full creative selves, that they don't have to check part of their identity or their passions at the door when they're creating something, you know. And if anything, some of the songs that touch me the most are, you know, I heard a song the other day that somebody had written about one of their relatives having dementia, but in the lyrics he was talking about, like, you may not remember her, but let me tell you all about her, and when you look in the mirror you may not remember who she is. And it's just such a heartwarming song. And I think, you know, the more we sing and write about those human experiences, however rare, however, you know, subdivided they are, I think it's so relevant, and it's stories that all of us need to hear. You know, it was a big shift for me. You and I have talked a little bit privately about some of my background coming into parts of the community and kind of pivoting from for a long time living a life of privilege with my skin tone and being perceived as straight passing, to when I stepped into my first relationship with a woman and suddenly becoming aware of the onslaught of different things I now had to consider as I communicated that to people. Am I in a safe space where I can acknowledge that and not jeopardize my safety or hers? And seeing her instinctively, she had grown up in that community all her life, and seeing, like, even if we caught a taxi to the airport, she lied about where we were from, or, you know, what the nature of our relationship was, because it's really none of the taxi driver's business, and it could jeopardize our safety as he drives us if we divulge that, you know. So it was definitely a lesson for me. And even though, you know, I may not occupy every single letter in that alphabet soup, I represent enough of them in the B, P, and K spaces to understand a little bit of what those other letters might face in their day-to-day lives, and their relationships, and their family dynamics, and their creative spaces. And I want to make sure that, to the extent that I can impact that they feel safe with me, and they know that I certainly don't have any derogatory feelings about my voice bank being used for, you know, love songs of that ilk, or for anything in that vein. You know, I want them to know that they're loved and they're seen and they're safe in this space.
I think especially, as once again it is Pride Month, I think it's also important that we kind of take a moment to just kind of like reach out our understanding to not just identities that we ourselves are not, but also identities that are kind of represented less, and as such there's less of a universal understanding. Like, not only is there the rampancy of biphobia and the rampancy of acephobia, but there's also just the very small amount of understanding on the nuances of polyamory and demisexuality that, it's just, I feel like if there's one thing that I really, really want people to do on this month of all months, is just think about people who aren't you.
Yes, that's very well stated. Very well stated. And honestly, that's what Pride is meant to be. It's meant to be allowing those people to be seen, and for their existence to be understood as valid, you know? I have found it very hard at times to explain to people what it means for me to be demi, and that you know, to try to adjust people's perception also in the way that they flirt with people or the way they approach people, and the sense of entitlement that a lot of straight guys, especially, or cishet guys, feel when they approach a curvy girl like me. You know, like that sort of sense, like, I have shown you my interest, you now must reciprocate in some fashion. And I'm like, no, I'm never obligated to, but as a demi girl and a girl in the LGBT space, I definitely don't have to reciprocate. And also, just because I'm poly doesn't mean I always have room for one more partner, you know? I think a lot of that can be misconstrued too. But then there's also, you know, as we've touched on, there's also so much nuance in those communities. I've seen some people kind of try to put demi under the ace umbrella, and I get why, but it is its own thing, you know? And that's why sometimes I spell it out sometimes separately with a capital D when I create that alphabet soup, because I do want to give it its own letter space there. And I think it's so important to understand that even when people do label themselves or identify a certain way, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a one-to-one match with another person we know in that space. If you know one trans person, their experience is not going to be identical to another trans person. And the same for every single letter there. you know, and then I'm glad you mentioned poly, because I do think that people are getting a growing awareness of that, you know, we love differently and we love a little more collectively, and that platonic love can also be part of that. But a lot of people feel kind of threatened by that, or think that we're saying that other forms of love are invalid, when that's never been really what any of the people in the LGBTQIA+2 soup have been saying. We've just been saying that your form of love is valid, so is ours.
Yes.
You know?
I think it's also that, but it's also like there is a lot of just intimidation over the prospect of making mistakes that I feel like should also be examined unto itself. Like, I have so many relatives, bless their souls, where it's like they end up coming around eventually, and when I discuss it with them, and kind of like how they felt prior and how they feel different now, is that a lot of it was not out of a form of hatred or feeling that they should have their rights stripped away. Not saying this applies to everyone, but I'm just saying that, like, it's something that should nonetheless be engaged, is that sometimes a lot of people lash out because they're just afraid at the prospect of making mistakes. They think that as soon as they make one mistake, it's all over, but that it's okay to ask questions, it's okay to be corrected. I'm non-binary, and the amount of times that I would accidentally misgender people who use they, them pronouns. Like, even after I came out, and then they're just like, you mean they? And then I'm just like, yeah, right, sorry.
Yeah, and that I try to catch myself and apologize, you know, when I do that. And I have found people are very gracious. They understand that you're trying when you put forth that effort. And I will always do my best to reward genuine curiosity with, you know, genuine, authentic answers. I have somebody in my space right now that's just fascinated by, you know, how I function in the poly space and how I function in my poly relationships. And he has said to me too many times for me to count on all my fingers and toes, I hope you don't feel offended that I'm asking you this, and you know that I'm not like, there's no judgment when I ask, I'm just curious how this part works, you know? And I'm like, no, I can see your question is coming from a genuine space of trying to comprehend it and get your mind around the difference of how that works in my situation versus yours, having been a married person for as long as you have been. So I like those questions.
I feel like the rule of thumb that I always give, that I will always give to, like, cishet allies, is that if you ask us a question, we can immediately tell right away based on your tone and your wording if it's an genuine inquiry to get to know us, or if it's that you're shifting the burden of proof onto us to justify our identities. If it's the former, we're more than happy to listen and answer, and we won't always think the worst of it because we can tell when it's the former and when it's the latter.
Absolutely. It's quite apparent to us from, exactly as you say, the phrasing, the tone, and what it's couched in, you know, and also our rapport with those people. Like, when those are people that have the opportunity to get to know, and we know that they see us as people and that they know we have a right to exist, those questions are automatically going to come from a warmer space and a less, you know, negative sounding space than an absolute stranger coming up to you with no other context and just tossing a random question your way, you know?
You justify your happiness to me.
Exactly. And you really touch on, you know, you hit the nail on the head there too, and that's just it. It's like, I think in years prior, a lot of it was down to they were trying to understand the logistics and the mechanics of it. But finally, the conversation is coming around to explain your happiness to me. And they are, I think, starting to see that there is happiness involved in these identities, and that we are who we really are when we wear those labels, that we're not wearing a label to show it off or like get attention for ourselves in some kind of way. If anything, we're trying to do the opposite, you know? But I think the more people, as you indicate, can ask those questions from a place of genuine desire to understand, we're very happy to meet them where they are and bring them into the fold of understanding. And at the same time, without trying to pressure them into adjusting their way of life to somehow match ours, we just like them to understand why we're living the way we're living, so that they can bring that understanding to other people too.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite conversations of explaining my gender identity was that I had someone say to me, "Don't you think you're overthinking it?" And then I was basically just like, well, no, if anything, I came to the conclusion so that I can stop thinking about it. Like, that's how this works. No aspect of queer theory is overthinking it. It's coming up with the answer so that we can stop thinking about it later. Because then, at that point, we're just our authentic selves, and we're just doing what comes naturally.
And you and I also talked privately previously about, like, the minutiae of certain terms being very freeing and helping clarify our internal understanding. And, like, for me, it was very eye-opening to hear the terms heteroerotic and homoromantic, that you could feel romantic feelings towards someone without necessarily feeling physically attracted to them, that there could be a delineation there. And I think the point of all of these terms and phrases isn't to just introduce more, tediousness into interactions or give you more to put on your dating profile, but instead it's meant to give you these colorful ways to expand the understanding of the full palette of the ways we interact with each other, and better find people that are like us, but also help people understand when we're different from them and we might approach things differently than they would.
Yes, I think a personal favourite aspect of inspecting my fluidity was having a moment where I was just like, do I like women? Do I like women? And then I realised it was just gender envy the whole time. It was just gender envy.
Brilliant.
I was just like, oh no, I just want to be them.
And I mean, we're kind of aware of that with our music advertising, like the way that we dress our female artists is always kind of leaning into pitching them to the gay community as, don't you want this outfit? And, there's definitely, even amongst the straightest of the straight and the oldest of the old in that industry, there's a strong awareness that exists, for sure. For sure.
Okay, so, the Vocalsynth community. We're a vocal bunch, no pun intended, and as soon as you were found out, you were inundated with questions, and here is no different, because I have in front of me a list of submitted questions asked by members of the community that I've chosen to bundle into this interview. And full disclosure to our listeners, I am going to read out the usernames, and yes, I am going to pronounce them wrong, and you're gonna have a good time doing so.
Very good.
First one I want to start with, as part of a huge bit of favoritism, is from my close friend Aryl, and it's not Vsynth related. She simply wanted to ask, what's your favorite book? Now, we have talked a little bit with regards to literature. I believe there was the recommendation you made to me before about How to Be Invisible by JJ Luna, which is a book on how to kind of like lead and construct a private life, but kind of just ignoring like what you would recommend, just favorite book? Go, pick a favorite child.
Favorite book? Oh, man, that is so hard because I like so many different genres. I love reading the work of Erik Larson, who takes historical events and takes the truth of them but paints them in a narrative fiction sort of light. But I also love the work of like Ellen Montgomery and Anne of Green Gables and the lyrical poeticness of that and the time period she's capturing. So those are, and I do love that JJ Luna book. I heavily recommend that to everybody. It's so important, especially in today's world where you're always having to think about ways to protect your identity, especially in the LGBTQIA2+ space. My very favorite book, one that I would like pick up and reread. Okay, this is going to be the weirdest answer, and I didn't see it coming myself. And I can't quite remember the name of it, which is going to work against me here, but this is my favorite book that I discovered, okay? It's a free book on Kindle, like it's a free ebook out there. It's from like the 1920s, and it's one of the earliest books on forensic science. Basically, in this book, they outline how you would do an autopsy to discover what caused a death. And in it, in the early chapters, they denote and totally shifted my perception that there are actually only 3 ways to die. It's always going to be tied back to a stopping of the heart, a stopping of the brain, or a stopping of the lungs. No matter how it came about, it will have to be one of those things. It can be those things in concert, but the primary mode of death will have to be one of those 3 things. And I thought that was a brilliant simplification.
So, next up we have Alex, Twitter handle HuaStyle, who asks, how long did the entire process on the voicebank from start to finish take, and what would you say was the hardest part for you?
Well, I went back through my emails to sort of get a sense of timeline, and it looks like that introductory email was in January of 2022, and then I was still sending them the final files, I believe, in May or June of 2022. So if you're strictly just looking at the overall timeline, it was about 6 months. But as far as how much time we actually spent in the studio or how much data was created, I know you and I talked earlier in this interview about like the total collection of just data laid back to back to back to back was probably like an 8-hour collection of audio on its face. But then the amount of time that I spent in the studio, especially on the portion that we knew was going to Dreamtonics specifically, we had some very in-depth studio sessions where we were trying to make sure it didn't have that headphone bleed. It did meet their criteria. That was a stretch of like 3 or 4 weeks max that we were wrapping up the final things for that batch for them. So there were parts of it that were quite intense, but then there were other introductory parts where we were sort of ramping up into it and preparing. So I feel like the preparing probably took more like 2 or 3 months, but the actual recording probably took somewhere in its heart between like 2 to 8 weeks, I would say.
Okay, so Zane Chihuahua Utal wants to know, what vocal exercises do you do when preparing for a recording session? Scales, articulations, vocal tone, breathing, posture, etc.?
It definitely depends on what we're recording that day. So if it is a voiceover or it's like one of those Mariah Carey really big songs that needs my full palette, then I do vocal warm-ups that I was trained to do by Chris and Carol Beatty, the vocal coach, that are mostly redressings of the way that children warm up. And the thing that they would always say in their vocal workshops is this, that when you think about the human that can sing the loudest, speak the loudest, you sometimes may think of a 2-year-old or like an infant, because they are screaming at the top of their lungs, right? They're able to do it for an infinite amount of time. And it's because they're sitting around all day going like lip trills and things like that. And it sounds really silly when you first hear it. But when you put it in practice, on the days that I know that I'm doing work that requires a lot of articulation or needs a lot of strength or a lot of power, but also some quietness, I'll do the lip trills in almost like a scale and just go. And you can even hear that in some of my vocal takes. I'm sure that some of the vocal takes that Robert sent to Dreamtonics probably had that warm-up at the beginning when he opened the mic before I sent it to him.
I just type the CL glottal stop phoneme in and I just hear like a random toddler trill out of nowhere.
Totally.
Now that's what we call data set poisoning.
And I mean, I do some scales too. We do some of the vowel sounds like A, E, I, O, U, or the 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, and then keep climbing up the scale. And for those big songs where I did need to find the upper part of my range or the lower part of my range for the Oh Wonder songs that we did, I do those as well. But more often, I get bored with that stuff. So a lot of the warm-ups that I personally do is singing Pieyezu, no cor punon mi sento. I'll sing a song in a different language. I'll sing a song that requires a lot of power, or I'll warm up singing harmony with Adele or Pink or some of these really big vocalists, because for me, that's more colorful. I don't strain myself. I don't get bored and tune out of it because I'm tired of singing the same phrase over and over again at different keys. So for me, that's been one of the best ways that I warm up personally. And I tend to do that for both voiceovers and work like this voice bank where I'm singing a lot.
I always make the mistake of warming up using the actual song that I'm about to sing, and then I do a whole run through, and then I just go, why the fuck was I not recording that?
You know, we try very hard to always record those first takes, even if it's just a warm up to set the volume level, because you never know what gems are going to be in there. But to your point also, it can be kind of bad to only warm up with the thing that you're recording, because if you need to expand above or beyond that, or if you're wanting to give it more than just a very midline performance, then you kind of want to sing something and warm up with something that's outside of the bounds of that thing. Also, if you're singing the same notes over and over again, you can kind of tire yourself. So there is a way in which I also try to avoid over-singing. I don't want to, I was careful when I recently did a voiceover for a client to do a lot of singing on the drive back home from it. In fact, I think I posted that one to TikTok, and I explained in the take, I'm very vocally tired because I've just done 3 hours of voiceovers, but I'm also very warmed up. It's this dichotomy of like not straining yourself, but also leaning into how vocally warm you are. And one of the things I do recommend, especially for vocalists or people who are training, is to keep in mind that if you are experiencing any sinus trouble, or you're getting a sore throat, or you were screaming at a sporting event or a concert the night before, avoid using like chloroseptic or any of those numbing agents, because what can happen is, while it might bring you some relief and make you feel like you can get a little more mileage out of your voice, in essence, what you're doing is subtracting the pain, and so you're negating your ability to know if you're straining yourself, so you can really vocally injure yourself and put yourself in a position where you'll lose your voice for a much longer amount of time, because you don't know when you're reaching those outer edges, and you don't know when to kind of pull it back in.
So it's almost like, at the end of the day, pain receptors exist to tell you that something in your body is wrong, and so in a way, providing that pain relief just makes you less attentive.
Exactly. And it can also make you, most of the time we're spraying it on the back of the throat where the pain is originating. But, some of those sprays are also quite wide, so they can hit the outer lips. And that's going to impact your articulation, just like a trip to the dentist, right? When they give you like a local anesthesia. So if you want to be able to articulate and really close off your consonants and be open-mouthed for your vowels, then all of that can sort of interfere with your muscular performance as well.
Right, and to clarify for those less experienced in vocal warm-ups, the main utility of vocal warm-ups is not only for the warm-up in of itself, but that they have less exertion than actually running through the material you're covering, correct?
Absolutely, at least in my mind. I see people approach it from a variety of different angles, but I've also seen some footage of like Christina Aguilera talking about ways that she warms up and how she'll eat honey, or even step off the stage to go eat honey to kind of like coat her throat a little bit before she does a lot of belting. And she has also talked about trying not to over warm up her voice ahead of time, and how important that is. So, and I mean, everybody is different. If you sing regularly, your voice also stays a little more warmed up on average than if you go a month or two and not singing and then you suddenly start again. So part of the reason, in fact, that I do the TikTok videos that I do, where I record myself while I'm just driving in traffic and sitting at stoplights doing what I call stoplight serenades, is that I want to keep myself always projecting from my diaphragm and singing at a loud volume in that contained environment of a car with my windows up, so that I'm never quite out of practice. There can be long stretches between my studio sessions and when I get commissioned to sing for somebody else, or when I have the time to go into the studio to sing for myself. So I don't want to be out of practice, and I want to keep that articulation and that strength. And I've definitely seen, even in my recordings, some of my clearest and best recordings are during stretches of my life where I was doing a lot of concerts back to back. And I just had a habit and a regimen of staying warmed up all the time, just like an athlete. It's a similar concept, You wouldn't go off to play the NFL if you hadn't gone through the rigors of those practices and all of those warm-ups as well. So to safeguard yourself, you want to warm up, but you don't want to overexert yourself and wear yourself out before the big game and the big event.
Onyx, aka Onyx Lucky Magica, says, I know there's a lot out there, but do you have a favorite original song or cover made using Natalie so far?
Well,
you're really being given the pick a favorite child questions.
Truly. And I also am first to admit that I have not made my way through all of the originals. And of course, as soon as I finally do catch up with that playlist that Vsynths was kind enough to make me, there will be more probably. So, but I will say, certainly Keep Walking, which I did sing recently during one of my stoplight serenades, is a really good one. And so much of that is because it has this, I like it because it has similar sensibilities to my own songwriting. It has those minor chords, it has the accidentals, it has like essentially 4 verses. It's a longer song. I like to break the norm of song traditions and have them be extended like that. But I do also really like the ones in different languages, even if I don't even always understand the meaning behind the lyrics. I love hearing somebody take my voice and doing this thing that I can't presently do with it. So I have a deep affection for those, whether they're originals or covers. Hearing me used in a different language is really beautiful.
Kind of taking your voice as a base and then making like a work that's very transformative from what you can presently do.
Totally. Yeah. So, and I have listened to some of the other originals too. In fact, I pinged Vsynths and said, could you also make a separate playlist for me of just the originals? And they just got that to me this week, so I haven't had a chance to hit play on it yet. But I do look forward to reviewing that one specifically so that I can listen to those back to back and really hear more of that detail. I know a lot of them are also in Japanese or in other music genres that I haven't had as much exposure to myself. So for those, I'm also still getting a little more introduced to the genre holistically and not just my words being used in that space. So forgive me for anybody listening going, why didn't she listen to me? I'm still getting familiar with that genre too. So it's not that I'm, pushing you away. It's that I'm just still getting through all of the content and all of the material.
Again, it's that overlap of where it's just like, while we are part of a very Western circle in the Vocalsynth community, and while your bank is part of a selection of like mascotless banks, you can't engage with it without eventually just bleeding over into that like anime otaku region. It's an inevitability. I've said it many times before, it's an inevitability.
Absolutely. And I love that. Like, I think that's part of the beauty of it, that it can live in both of those spaces.
Exactly.
But it's definitely, and my partner who works in a video game design space has, even before this new embracing this community recently, has been introducing me to some of that. But this has just instigated my upping the ante on that and getting to know that community more, for sure.
I think one of my personal favorites aspects of kind of like telling people that I had the opportunity to interview you is that like I've kind of explained before, Vocaloid by Yamaha is one of the more prominent cultural milestones in the industry, and it's kind of to the point where Vocaloid is associated colloquially with our industry, almost in the same way as when your parents refer to your game console as a Nintendo, even though it's not made by Nintendo. So the amount of times that I would explain to people like, oh yeah, so I've been able to give an interview to Natalie Nicole Gilbert, who voiced a Vocalsynth, and they're just like, no, what does that mean? And then I just go, she did a Vocaloid!
You're like, let me just, I had a friend message me recently on WhatsApp, actually, a friend who's followed my radio and music work for a long time, who used to work with me in radio, and he messaged me saying, like, you seem to be blowing up lately, but I can't quite understand the dynamics of it. Could you explain it to me? And I'm like, I could try. Like, it's kind of like this, but also like that, and you might just have to watch the interview.
I do kind of have to like dread like any future correspondence that you have to do where you're just like, so first I've got this like 20-page encyclopedia that explains all of the context about what this goddamn project is that I signed up to.
Legit. And I'm not the least bit ashamed to say that as I reconfigured my bios on my social media lately and my bio on my website, I came to you and said, I think this is the right terminology and the right phraseology that is generally accepted by the community. Could you just like give me a thumbs up on that, which you did. Thank you. But it's helpful because, I don't want to misspeak or make it less or more than it is, but also want to fully celebrate and recognize what it is in a way that people in the community will know what it is. And it was interesting, too, in my prior interview a week ago, she took some of that language that you and I had cultivated and tried to use it as it was. And I was like, actually, in your space where you're not speaking directly to the community, I might phrase it a little bit differently to help people understand, and we reworked it a little bit for her space. But I think that's the beauty of it, is that when you know who your audience is, you can kind of tailor make it. Like, we think of these as Kleenexes, even though Kleenex is just one of the main brands, but they're all Kleenexes, whether they are the Kleenex brand or not.
Yeah, we also just have we have a whole selection of overly formal vernacular, but we only really use it on an external basis. So oftentimes when we refer to a singer, we just call them a bank, or we just call them a VB, but then it's if you're explaining it to someone who doesn't know anything about this, you're just like, it's a vocal library.
Yes, which is a good way to put it. A library, yes.
It's a vocal library.
I should introduce that.
So we kind of went over this when we were kind of like discussing the process of recording for the Natalie Bank, but I think it was kind of like fun to kind of like focus on it specifically. Moonlove Skunks asks, were there any caveats or things that you had to adjust to while recording? Were there any singing habits that you had to drop or adopt while recording?
I'm really grateful to say that, thank goodness, there was not a lot of vocal adjustment on my part as a human, which I had definitely thought there would be at the outset. I thought they would need it delivered, maybe monotone, maybe at a very particular volume, very particular notes, very particular phonemes, or, alphabets that they wanted me to just rattle through like Siri. But thankfully, to the best of my recollection, the only real problem we had, you touched on earlier, and that is the headphone bleed, which was most predominantly done during the songs that I was singing along to that had real live string players or had dance beats in them, because that would bleed through the headphones most. So we just had to bring down the volume in my headset as low as we could take it, while still leaving me in a space where I could perform accurately and perform on key, which is a very fine balance to strike with some of those songs, especially the more lush songs, or the songs where we had really stripped back the instrumentation, so there was so little there to indicate what key I was in. I think sometimes there I felt like I was getting very pitchy, and I was glad that that Robert could correct it. But for the most part, I think the only real treatment that we had to do to anything was either filtering it to take out the headphone, or just having me re-record it to turn down that headphone volume as much as we could. And for the most part, I didn't mind just re-recording it so we could get it as clean and as tight as we could. But thankfully, there was never instruction to like sing louder or sing quieter or enunciate more clearly, or a lot of those things that maybe 15 years ago I might have been told in the studio. But because I've just been in the studio so much and I've worked with Robert so long, they were things we sort of instinctively always did anyway. So maybe that's why they didn't have to be said out loud.
Yeah, there are definitely like stories in the Vsynth industry about like the frustrations that would come about from trying to record around a concatenative list, especially if you were recording in a language that you weren't fluent in, because as concatenative sample-based banks don't use AI, we don't have any of that multilingual stuff, so if you wanted to support a language, you needed to record those phonetics. As a matter of fact, there is one particularly cited story, is that Hatsune Miku's V3 English voice bank had a lot of turmoil in its development because Saki Fujita, the Japanese voice actress who voices Miku, she was very frustrated trying to wrap her head around these English phonetics and trying to deliver them in a way that's like not only good in the pronunciation department, but is also fluid within the context of recording for a sample-based bank, where she has to do it level, she has to do no entrances, no exits, no vibratos. And there was even occasions in recording where Yu Asakawa, who is the actress who plays Megurine Luka, the pink-haired one, she would basically have to sit in the recording sessions with Fujita just to kind of be her like moral support to help her get through the list, because I believe Asakawa is bilingual, or at least that she was more fluent in English than Fujita was, who I believe had no prior English experience while recording the bank.
That is tough. And even though I didn't have to do that for Dreamtonics, I will say years ago, and I think I posted a link to this recently, that review that I had about having a cute American accent when I sang French. When I sang French for French TV, it was a remake of a 70s prog rock band, and I had a couple of French songs I sung in that. I had only had, I think, 1 or 2 semesters of French by that time, so I knew overarching pronunciation, but not like finite pronunciation, and not how to nail every single word that was in the script. And I think we had also been given very little time to review the song and get familiar with it before we were in the studio. So I think I asked them, can I bring my older sister with me? Because she studied French for like 3 years at the college level, collegiately. Could she come in and kind of coach me through some of those sections to make sure my pronunciation is as close to what it should be as possible? And then because I asked them to bring her in, they let her do the speaking parts, which I'm forever grateful for. I just did the singing and she did the speaking. But it is tough when it's a language you don't know. because it's not just a matter of pronunciation, it's also, where is the accent within the word. And when you're singing it and where the sung accent falls differently than the word accent, there's just so many different things to kind of take into consideration there. So I was very glad to have those other ears to come alongside me and assist. And I kind of wish that French song had been recorded more recently so that I could hand it off to Dreamtonics. But who knows where those session files are. I was living in a different state. That was like at least 15 years ago. But I mean, I could also record for them the French song I wrote for my cats or something like that, just because I know there's been a lot of push in the community for there to be a French bank made from my voice or somebody else's.
Yeah.
And I would love to give them.
And we have been getting like a lot of pushes for different language supports, such as when I showed you Magni AI, the engine worked on by Misba Studios, and how they're really working their damnedest to really broaden the level of the amount of languages that are available in the commercial space. The sigh of relief that I breathed when I've been workshopping recording my own AI bank at some point, my friend who has been working on the bank with me was basically just like, so we've effectively figured out how to do cross-lingual synthesis, we won't need you to record Mandarin data. And I was like, thank God, I won't have to sing in Mandarin, my Mandarin is terrible, I could barely read Pinyin.
That's brilliant. But hey, I mean, at least you have some of that information to draw from.
Exactly. It's like it's free learning at the end of the day, so can't go wrong with that. The J Fluffy asks, what things have you found the most interesting with the world of Vsynths, either during the process of making the bank or interacting with the community? So what's kind of been like the most fascinating discovery?
I think the thing that stands out to me, or especially stood out to me as I got to know the community, is how similar we are and how many of those communities overlap. That the community that is drawn to vocal synth music production is also neurodivergent, is also frequently somewhere in the LGBTQIA plus pi, and that there's such similar souls there, that they're drawn to a lot of the same content online, some of the same characters, some of the same TV shows, that even though we're in all such disparate locations and of varied ages and ethnicities and, just all different walks of life, that there seems to be so much that unites us that goes beyond just the vocal synth technology. And it's been really interesting to see all of that overlap, as you and I have touched on just a bit in our interview, that comes through so strongly. And I think there's something about that sort of speaks to how open-minded and forward-thinking and experimental, just open holistically, all of those communities are, and very expressive at the same time. Also a lot of visual artists, also a lot of, video gamers and RPGers in that space. So it seems like a community that's full of a lot of people like you and I that are both left and right brained, which is beautiful, because I have to say, like, when I look around LA, almost everybody is right brained. And I, as a person who can access the left brain at all, am such a rarity here. And it means that I effectively wind up speaking a very different language than people around me. And I mean, one of the ways that I resonate with the autistic community most is that I feel like I'm so often misunderstood and people misinterpret things I'm saying and like put words in my mouth. I'm like, that is not what I said at all. You are completely misinterpreting. And I go, this is part of why I info dump and I over explain things, because I'm trying so hard to articulate the picture as I see it in my brain and recalibrate it for a non-neurodivergent set of brains, that I think there's a lot of relief when I'm in a community like the vocal synth community, where so many, almost all of us are neurodivergent in some fashion or another. And so we all seem to hear each other clearly without that misinterpretation, even though we're online. Like, anybody would forgive the misinterpretation, I think, if it was there, especially with various language barriers and all of that. But it seems like everybody hears each other.
Yeah, and that's also why I'm, like, over time I've become grateful of, like, other developments, like, for example, tone indicators, the way in which we're able to mark, like, sarcasm when we're clearly joking about something. But going back to, like, why we info dump and why we over-explain, I had to have probably one of the most painful conversations with a friend, where I had to sit down with them and just be like, because, I make video essays, I like to assess media, and I like to, like, overthink about all the different aspects of it, and then I'm just like, I regret to inform you that this is just how I talk. This is just how I talk about things that I like, because I grew up with, like, people not having any clue what I'm talking about or misinterpreting me, so I've just grown up thinking that the right thing to do is just be extremely verbose and extremely detailed.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and I absolutely understand that can be intense and intimidating for some people who are not as verbose or verbally gifted, you know. So I try to be sensitive to when I need to rein it in, you know. But it's tough depending on who your audience is, you know. But I'm always trying to think anecdotally and make comparisons that help people picture. I think it does also help when you're like you and I, Joey, and you are bilingual in any, or multilingual polyglots in any kind of fashion. I think in my other interview, I mentioned that I, in years past, also used to interpret ASL. And so, you know, one of the top things that they taught me when I was being taught to be an interpreter was to picture what you're trying to fingerspell or say, so that even if you don't know the words, you can think of what gestures you might use or what you would compare it to. And I think that was a really eye-opening consideration for me in all my communication, is to always try to put yourself in the shoes of the other person and think, how would they see this? How would they understand it? And it has helped me so much in my writing and my editing also, to go back through my writing and go, okay, if I were a person of color reading this, would I find anything offensive here? You know, I'll do passes where I look for all kinds of problems that might not have been inherently or expressly done, but that when I can try to read it through somebody's eyes, I can see how something might hit them differently, and just try to put on those various glasses to see it through a different lens. And part of that is also just bringing those other people into my critique group and asking for feedback and taking that criticism when people are like, actually, your lesbian is coming across as a bit of a villain in this screenplay, and you might not want to do that in the pilot. Maybe wait for that because it's a bit of a trope, you know, like things like that. And I'm happy to be called out on that and adjust and set my sails a little differently, knowing that, trusting that the people who give me that know that I didn't do that intentionally, but that they're also trying to help me avoid pitfalls and help me avoid being misunderstood by people who don't know me well enough to know that I didn't do that intentionally.
Of course, yes.
I was in France once during Pride, actually, and it was such a hot, I think that was when Paris was like 115 Fahrenheit. It was so hot. People were like jumping in the fountains everywhere. It was so hot. And I think it was partly because my brain was so fried by the heat, I couldn't remember the word for water. And as I was approaching the queue in a cafe to order something to go to drink, I kept thinking, I'm going to get to the front of the line and not know what to say. I'm so thirsty. I don't even know. And my salvation was that right behind her was a shelf of the various things they had on offer. So when I got to the cash register, I just said, Perrier! That was good enough to get me by, because I knew the brand name and I knew how to say that, and that was water. That was good enough, you know? But your salvation sometimes will just be the adjacent thing that's not even like the word you're reaching for, but communicates what you're trying to say good enough.
And to close out with our audience questions, JTLJ3KT, I practice that one a lot, asked if there are any artists that you feel that you take heavy inspiration from. Who are kind of like your big inspiring idols, would you say?
It's so tough because I wonderfully got exposed to so much growing up. Because my mom raised me on a lot of jazz, my sister raised me on a lot of love songs, my brother was listening to a lot of rock, so I kind of got it from every side. But as to like whose music was always on replay for me, there definitely was a lot of Whitney Houston, there was a lot of Mariah Carey. I definitely leaned heavily into those soulful artists that were also borrowing from their jazz predecessors, right? So it kind of had the jazz and soul imbued in it, but also had this newer, fresh pop and R&B flavor to it. So I think I've kind of always leaned into the nostalgic artists, the artists that cover the nostalgic older pieces, but also brought something fresh to the table. So I think, you know, Whitney and Mariah are definitely two that I often cite, which I think you can kind of hear in my work. But I did also grow up listening to just a lot of popular guy artists as well. I liked Peter Cetera in Chicago. In more recent years, I've really enjoyed Sam Smith and Callum Scott. So I think there's a little bit of everything in there. It might be surprising to some people that I haven't listened to as many singer-songwriters as I probably could have or should have, given the body of my work. But I do have an appreciation for like a Katie Tunstall or a Joe. I love Holly Brooke, and I like her newer entity, Skylar Grey, as well. I liked her early work. So I think I listened to a lot of stuff on Pandora and its singer-songwriter channel, but also its jazz channel. So, I did certainly get a lot of exposure to Ella Fitzgerald and Eartha Kitt as well. Her version of C'est Si Bon is like peak. You cannot get a better performance of C'est Si Bon than Eartha Kitt. Especially with all her little like speaking parts in between. Crazy, no? The accent she puts on it is great. But yeah, I think it's a pretty wide gamut, but I think the soulful artists are definitely the ones that I always kept hitting replay on. But if there's anybody that I most want to emulate, like if I could take their career and copy paste it onto mine, I think it would actually be Laura Fabian. Not least because as Quebecois, she has totally nailed the French genre. So much of her catalog is French, but she sings beautifully in English. She's also sung in Italian. She sings these very classic, jazz leaning stuff, but then she's also able to do a dance tune and knock it out of the park. So she's one of the few artists I've seen that can really do that whole full gamut like I can and elevate it and take it beyond what I can. So if I follow in her footsteps, I would not be a sad camper at all.
We're in the kind of like tail end of things. So I think one of the things that I kind of just want to hear from you is there anything that you'd like to share with us? Like any projects for us to look forward to in the future from yourself? There's that album that you've got coming out with like some of the leftover training data.
Yeah, I think the working title that I have leftover, or not leftover, but that I'm assigning freshly to that old set of songs that I did for Dreamtonics, I think is Old Life, New Love, or something like that. It's kind of looking at songs about relationships, but in introspective ways that aren't so cut and dry as like, ooh, crushy love, or like long-term love. That's kind of like relationships that are in more of a gray area. And a lot of really heartfelt ballads are in that stretch, but there's also some ethereal stuff in there too. I think one of those is actually a Holly Brooks song called Like Blood, Like Honey. That's one of her lesser known early works. There's also one in there from Foy Vance called If Christopher Calls. It's really beautiful. I have a sample of it on my Instagram where I was kind of toying with the mix and seeing how I felt about the vocals. A number of those that I've kind of had in process, finally taking toward the finish line. So I'm excited about that project. What else? I feel like there was another single that I had coming out soon that I'm totally forgetting right now. I did have the New Age single earlier this year called Listen that I worked on with David Vito Grigoli. He also worked with the Police on their I'm going to be misquoting it, but they recently had a reimagining of one of their albums with a little bit of that Bollywood like Hindi feel to it. With some really beautiful drums and stuff. He worked on that project, so it was very fun to get to work with him on his new age sort of acoustic project. And he brought out like a Celtic guitar and maybe a didgeridoo or something. He just mixed a lot of different cultural references. His studio is so full of instruments from all different parts of the world. It's kind of fabulous. Even his ISO booth that he like handcrafted has a mandala on the side. I should share that picture with you. Yeah, I think those are the main two that I'm working on. I have also been music supervising of late. I music supervised a film set in Hong Kong called The Modelizer. That's now out on Apple and I think Netflix as well, most of the streamers. And then I have a documentary that I music supervised for recently called The Last Lap about a female Olympic runner up in Seattle that I music supervised for, and that is right now on the festival circuit. I think it just debuted maybe last month at the Seattle Film Festival, so that will be making the rounds as well. So a little bit of everything. But yeah, we shall see. We shall see what other collaborations.
Lovely stuff. And what about conventions or events? Is there anything like routine or upcoming for you where people can drop by and say hi?
Ooh, well, I have sometimes made my way into NAMM. I used to endorse, I never really stopped my endorsement, but it's just been a quiet set of years. I used to go to NAMM with Daisy Rock guitars made specifically with femmes in mind. But for a while during COVID, that had been shut down. I think they only recently resurrected that. So I missed the one this year, but perhaps might go next year. And if I am able to go in concert with Dreamtonics or Eclipse Sounds, I'm definitely down for that. And I've put that on their radar, as I think people have seen in my Twitter feed. I do also like to go to a lot of the songwriting workshops. A lot of those these days have been moved online. But I love studying with Andrea Stolpe and Bonnie Baker. And one of these days I would like to get to the CD Baby Music Conference as well, that is specifically geared for independent musicians and distribution and ways that we go about that. I have not booked that yet, but I'm hoping to make it to that sooner or later. Of course, so many conferences are held here in LA, so I try to catch the ones that I can. I know some of my counterparts right now are down at the South by Southwest Festival in Austin. I'm sorry I had to miss that one. But I try to catch some of the film festivals as well when they stop into town. So if the community is ever at a conference close by, please tag me in and let me know about it. And if there's a way that I can bring myself there, I will be happy to.
I think one thing that I'd like to rally the community on that we should definitely make happen is that if there ends up being like another like Vsynth live tour like MIKU Expo with all the hologram concerts, I feel like everybody should absolutely hit you up on like, Natalie, are you going to MIKU Expo?
I want to. I would love to be there. Just seeing some of the footage people have shared.
I can see you in the stands, just like, as a matter of fact, hang on. This right here, I never actually did get to go, but it was like a little consolation present for myself. This right here is a 2020 MIKU Expo glow stick. I can imagine you going ham with one of these.
I would do like the slow, what do they call it? Slow exposure light thing, like photos. Just drawing with it.
And the best part, it cycles through colors to like either represent your favorite vocalist or to represent who's currently on stage.
That's brilliant. That's so cool.
So you can either be part of the crowd in like a big wave of whoever's currently performing, or you can just try to be different.
That's excellent. That's kind of like the light that we used in that Pride strip of photos that I have that was cycling through all the LED lights in one take. Oh, that's so cool. I love that stuff.
Well, I believe that's all she wrote as far as my outline goes. So yeah, Natalie Nicole Gilbert, everyone. If I had a live audience right now, I'd be making sure everyone stood up and applauding.
Well, I am definitely applauding back to them too. I can't tell you what a joy it's been to just get to know this community and see all the ways that people have been using the voice bank. It's so much more than I think I ever could have dreamed at the outset, and I'm just so proud of everyone in the space for being so creative and for daring to share it publicly. It's so easy to make something and kind of keep it to yourself, but I love seeing all the work that people have posted, and I hope that they keep it up for a very long time.
Absolutely. I'm going to be taking the liberty of kind of like filling the description of this very interview with like all sorts. There's going to be my link tree with all my stuff. There's going to be your link tree in question so that people can access things like your social media and all of your other works, some particular highlights of your career. I'll also probably be like citing some little sources, anything that we kind of talked about, like any particular media or material. I'm just going to link them down below as well for easy access. And that's where we're going to be leaving things from there. So thank you very much for attending. It has been an absolute pleasure. Like, it's been a pleasure chatting with you, like, all this time that we've been getting to know each other. But here in particular, I feel like we've just hit so many amazing beats in terms of just what this has been leading up to. So thank you so much for your time.
Totally. Well, and thank you for inviting me on and taking that time to converse with me in advance. And I'm so excited to see the works that you make and what collaborations we might do in the future and staying in touch.
100%,
It's going to be awesome.
100%. And we managed to get through all this without mentioning California or that one demo.
That's true.
This California